Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
And we are here, as always, to talk about stuff, though later perhaps...
Yeah, as always? Can we say that? Is that fair to say, Jonathan?
It's absolutely not fair to say.
Yeah,
In fact,
I don't think so either.
It's been so long since our last episode, I forgot how to record this, and this is our second take.
Yeah.
Which we normally don't do second takes.
Well...
Unless I fuck up,
yeah,
which
is relatively often, actually. Like,
yeah.
It's not uncommon for you to start and then forget what you're doing, and then just pause and redo it.
I'm under a lot of pressure here, man.
Yeah, so much pressure.
Radio, live radio, it's tough.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. This is not live nor radio, but it is the Weekly Stuff Podcast, and if you are new to the show, or you're a longtime listener who forgets what our voice sounds like because it's been 2 months, this is a show in which we talk about movies and video games and television. By that, mostly we mean superhero movies, Persona games, and Doctor Who.
Yeah, we've really specified over the years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think we're the utmost experts in those three topics combined.
I would say so, yes. Yeah. In the specific place where those intersect. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of people, not a lot of professionals working right there in that sweet spot.
Exactly.
But I think it's the right spot to be. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's been a while since our last episode. As always, no real good excuse for that other than the last couple weeks of our school semesters were busy.
Yeah.
I presume yours was busy?
Yes.
Mine was busy. Okay. And then
Finals, bro.
And then we went on Christmas break, and Sean and I have been friends for 10 years, and when you don't have to see a longtime friend, I feel like you just kind of don't. So we didn't speak for a month and a half.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
It was so good.
Okay.
No stress, no worries. I didn't have to talk about superhero movies or Doctor Who or Persona games. I just got to experience them,
Indeed. But now we're back, and we get to talk about all of that stuff. So, today's episode, our first episode of 2015, which is the 4th year of this show, this incarnation of the show. Pretty crazy.
Well, kind of this incarnation.
Yeah, under the numbering that I'm using, which is the WGTC Radio and Weekly Stuff numbering.
Which at some point it's just kind of arbitrary to combine the two.
It is kind of arbitrary. But, there you go. We're on episode 103. It's 2015. And today we are going to kick off the year, as we do most years, with some retrospective stuff. So we're going to do the top 10 video games of 2014. We each have our own lists. We're going to talk about them, compare them. I don't think there'll be any major arguing, but, we'll see if that crops up.
Unless you fucking, put Hotline Miami on your list again or something so dumb. We're just this game clearly didn't come out this year, but this is when I played it, so it's on my list.
The Hotline Miami port for PS4 was really good.
Yeah, I played a little bit of that.
Let me revise my list really quick. No, just kidding. Yes, no, there's no cheating on my list that I am aware of so far, but
there's a little cheat, but I left on mine, but I left it in honorable mentions.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So anyway, that'll be our big one. If you haven't been paying attention to the website this podcast is connected to, www.jonathanlack.com, I did all my movie retrospective stuff there, and in fact, if you subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, as you should, you got a bonus episode, which was the top 10 films of 2014. Normally, for the audio version of that, I do the top 10 list on the show, but I thought, because you were away for the weekend or something, or you'd already gone home for break or something, and so I was alone, and normally I don't like those parts of the podcast where maybe it's a topic that only one of us has any awareness of, and we're only that one person talking, so I thought, instead, I could just branch out, do my own episode of that, and maybe produce it more. I had an actual script, music, a lot of other production things in there. So if you're interested in what my top 10 films of 2014 are, you can listen to it there. You can read the list on the site. And then I did that list all the way out to number 30 with a 20-11 list and a 30-21 list. I've said it many times, 2014 was a phenomenal year for film, and lots of good stuff, a lot of which is coming into theaters now and being completely destroyed at the box office by American Sniper. Which somehow made $120 million this weekend.
Jeez.
Yeah. It's bigger than several Harry Potter films.
I'm fine with that.
I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Fucking American Sniper being some dumbass British fucking magic bullshit. Fuck yeah.
Well, there is this scene where Bradley Cooper, Harry picks up an RPG and he has to shoot him.
Yeah.
I've seen the trailer for American Sniper. That's it. It was not a priority for me for end of year viewing. It's just not my kind of movie. Nothing against it, but I will probably see it at some point now because it, as I said, somehow made an insane amount of money for the month of January. In any case, yes. So that's all the movie stuff. No more. Well, we're going to do a little movie talk, because I should say we're going to have 3 main topics on this week's episode. First up is that top 10 video games of 2014 thing we talked about. We'll do all of that. Then we're going to launch into a little discussion of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Not because this was one of the best films of 2014.
Because it definitely wasn't.
No, it did not place on my top 30 or anything. But it's interesting, and we've followed the Hobbit series over the last couple of years on this show because I think, quality aside, it's fascinating.
Yeah. It's like, I'm not particularly interested in talking about that movie. I'm interested in talking about the trilogy and the decision to make it 3 movies and stuff. Now that, like, we can actually talk about it because it's all out.
Absolutely, because I think one of the first things we ever covered on this show was the split of The Hobbit into 3 films. That happened right after we started the show. And so we've been just following this series since the beginning, and we're a little late to talk about it. It came out about a month ago, but definitely worth following up on that.
It's given us time to reflect.
Definitely. I'm actually glad, because my opinion has definitely settled in different ways.
Yeah,
I like some things more, dislike some things more. And then at the end of the show, as always, little Doctor Who discussion. The Christmas special aired over Christmas break, on Christmas Day, obviously. That's always a tough one to know when to talk about, because obviously we're not recording a show on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
But we're going to get to it. Doctor Who Last Christmas. We talk about every episode of Doctor Who on here, if you're not aware. And if you don't watch Doctor Who, you really should. And you can pick it up wherever.
And as that title now implies, the Doctor Who's decree that Christmas is over. That was, that was the last Christmas.
Indeed.
We can't celebrate it anymore.
Next year, they're going to move to Boxing Day specials, and he is going to box a kangaroo.
Yeah, exactly.
Going to be in Australia. It'll be great. All right, so that's it. Let's see. So, Sean, what's anything else you want to go with before we get started here?
No, because it's been 2 months since the last one, so I don't know like where I would start with like random other bullshit.
Yeah, I have a bunch of little mini topics I'm thinking of, but we can save that for other weeks. Other than that, I think it's probably best to just get down to business this week.
I will say one thing. Earlier this morning, I was just kind of bored and had like 30 minutes I needed to kill. So I just loaded up Crunchyroll and decided to just watch some random fucking anime. Mm-hmm. And so I watched Polar Bear Cafe, which is about a polar bear who runs a cafe and his like frequent guests, a panda and a penguin.
You don't say.
That show's pretty fucking cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will check that out.
Polar Bear Cafe.
It's an easy title to remember.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And the best part about it is that all the animals are like rendered in like super lovingly realistic detail. So it's not like cartoon polar bears. It like looks like a real fucking polar bear. It's great.
That's so cool.
It's really good.
Man, that's funny. So normally at this part of the show, we just talk about stuff we've been doing.
Yeah.
And I think most of that's actually going to come out in the lists, because if we're going to talk about any games we've been playing, I think those are on our lists.
Yeah.
Or in honorable mentions. So we will get to all that. But yes, I'm glad to hear about Polar Bear Cafe. I've got Crunchyroll pinned on my Xbox screen. I should use it sometime. And what better way to start than
Polar Bear Cafe.
Yeah, indeed.
It's a real cool show.
Sean, you want to talk about the top 10 games of 2014?
I think it's about time we did.
All right. First thing to talk about, as always with these kinds of lists, is a couple of things. One, what did we think of this year in video gaming as in general trends and whatnot? And how did you fashion your list? Kind of what went into that, and what kind of philosophy did you see overriding things this year?
Yeah, so I guess this was a bad year for video games, like overall, because there was just like a lot of big games that came out that were really disappointing in a lot of ways. And so there was like nothing this year that, like, when I made my list, there was no game that I was like, well, this has to be my number one. Or even like there was only 1 or 2 games that I was like, that's going to be in my top 5 at the very least. Just because there was nothing that was like a huge masterpiece. So like I found like there was a bunch of games that came out this year that were like really good, but nothing that was like super amazing. And the only stuff that had like something that was super amazing in it came with like incredible caveats, So there's like games that were either like really solid and really good, or games that had like one part of it was super amazing and the rest of it was like, what the fuck were you people doing when you made this game? Yeah. So the ultimate effect of that was I found my list very easy to assemble 10 games, very difficult to order 10 games in any way that like made any sense. And I should also point out that just right now that one of the things on my list is a piece of DLC, but I thought like fuck it, like that counts at this point.
I imagine I know what that piece of DLC is, and it's been on enough top 10 lists that I think you're in the clear on this. Yeah, so I agree with what a lot of what you said there. And I said this in my top 10 films of 2014 list, where whether you think the year was good or bad for any piece of media, we live in an age where enough of all media is coming out that there's always going to be stuff to love. Yeah. You just have to know where to look. I don't think 2014 was any different. If I just look at my top 10 games of the year, those are 10 games I really loved and find special and had a lot of fun with, and I'm glad exist and that I can put on a top 10 list, and I feel like it's a solid top 10 list this year. But it was a bad year for games. You can kind of
Yeah.
say both things at once. I mean, this was a year with a lot of really horrible controversy around the fringes of things that was just kind of sad and disheartening. Very sad and disheartening. I shouldn't say kind of. It just was sad.
Yeah.
And a lot of games that were broken or disappointing. You know, a lot of games.
Yeah.
I felt like when I look at the trends on my list, there are only a couple big AAA like main platform releases, like on the Xbox or PS4. And I think there's a reason for that. Most of them were not very interesting, or the ones that were interesting, as you say, came with some pretty major caveats. Nintendo platforms became my platform of choice this year. I thought they did really work over there, just kind of keeping their head down and churning out good creative games. Couple of indies that I liked this year, but other than that, I mean, it was, as you say, kind of a weak year, and, you know, hell, a lot of what I enjoyed were re-releases of past games.
Yeah. I mean, that was a huge trend of this year.
Yes.
When I was looking through, like, the list of, like, all the games that came out, and it was like, holy shit, I totally forgot about, like, just the staggering number of remastered, like fucking Sleeping Dogs had a remastered edition and shit like that.
Yeah. Well, like, I've been playing Grand Theft Auto 5 on my Xbox One, and it's awesome. It's a great remaster. If you haven't played that game or you like that game, get it. But it's like, you can't put that on a top 10 list.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be bullshit. So anyway, let's go ahead and just go through
I
the
should have
list.
just made my number one Last of Us Remastered Edition and just said, fuck it.
Yeah.
That's how good that game is.
Indeed.
It just passes again.
It is a very good game. So do you want to do honorable mentions now or at the end of the show?
Let's just do it now.
Now? Okay, so I really only have one or two major ones because my biggest honorable mention I know is on your list.
Yeah.
But what ones do you have?
I mean, my one major honorable mention that is like one that is only an honorable mention because I couldn't justify it coming on the list because it did not technically come out this year, but this was the only year I played it, was Diablo 3.
Okay.
Because the Ultimate Evil edition of Diablo 3 came out this year on like basically everything, and this is the first time I ever played Diablo 3, and I thought it was a great game. I thought it was actually incredible that it plays so well on a console when I thought that a traditional PC game like Diablo would never be able to work, but I think it probably actually works better because the combat's a lot more satisfying with the controller, and it's just a game that I had a huge amount of fun with, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it because, like, with Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, those are both games that I really adored, but I always burnt out on them, and Diablo 3 is a game that I beat, like, I completed, like, all the story stuff, and then went into their adventure mode that kind of just lets you go through, like, redesigned dungeons and stuff to get new gear, and did that for, like, a good solid, probably, like, 10 or 12 hours past the game. So, yeah, Diablo 3 Ultimate Evil Edition is really, really good. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. But it technically came out, like, 4 years ago originally, so I was like, I can't really put it on the list.
I will say, Diablo 3 was fantastic, and I played probably 15 hours of it on your copy. And I really loved it. If it had come out at a different time of the year for me, I probably would have played the whole thing. And in fact, you saying it now, I just want to go back and play more of it.
Yeah.
And honestly, the most fun I had with it, though, was watching you play it at a super high level. And
Oh
how
yeah, when
crazy
you
that
get
game
to
gets.
because I played the Crusader, when you get to the highest level with that dude, it's just fucking crazy. You're just calling like giant beams from the heavens and like summoning other dudes and shooting shit all over the place. Like that is a game where the physics engine adds a huge amount to what makes the combat fun because it's just walking into a room with like 50 zombies and like 100 barrels lining the wall and using a giant shockwave and just seeing everything bounce off the walls and like a really crisp 60 frames per second. So,
it was
awesome.
There's a confidence and polish to that game that I wish we would have seen more of in 2014.
I mean, that's what happens when you've had 4 years to
Yes.
work on it and the benefits of like all the patches and stuff coming over.
Absolutely. Any other honorable mentions for you?
My other honorable mention is Hearthstone, Heroes of Warcraft.
Absolutely. That's one of mine, too.
I mean, that's mostly an honorable because it technically came out this year, and it's only really an honorable mention because I just couldn't figure out how to place it on the list because it's almost not even really a video game at some point. It's just a collectible card game that you happen to play on your computer, and it's a game that I had a huge amount of fun with, and I just never really stuck with it because it just like came at a bad time where other stuff was coming out that I wanted to focus on. But it's like a game that I always in the back of my head, like I still have it on my computer, and I just see that shortcut. I'm like, one of these days I need to get back into Hearthstone because it's a game that also keeps on updating itself, and I haven't played it for a while. But it's a really, really well designed CCG on a computer, and
if you
it's
feel
fun to
like,
play.
and if you're worried about being intimidated by it or something, don't. You can jump right in, and it is so. It's got a great tutorial. explains itself well. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, and compared to something like Magic, the systems are a lot easier to understand, you know?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily super simplified, but it's like just a lot easier to approach.
Mm-hmm. It's like probably what your memories of Yu-Gi-Oh were, where you thought when you were a kid Yu-Gi-Oh was a good game. If you played it now, you'd be like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah.
But you can play Hearthstone.
Yeah.
And it's great.
And you don't need to know anybody to do it. You don't
Right.
need to, like, bring your deck to lunch in, like, middle school or something. Be like, hey, guys, you want to play some Yu-Gi-Oh? And just kill yourself inside a little bit every time you do that.
Did you ever do that?
No.
Okay.
I like when I was in the 4th grade, not middle school.
Okay, yeah. It was like elementary school for me.
Yeah.
But yeah. In any case, yeah. So Hearthstone would have been one of my honorable mentions. I've got 2 more. Like I said, my big honorable mention, what would have been number 11, is on your list, and I'll talk to it when you talk about it.
Okay.
My other one, though, could be on your list. I don't know. I'm guessing no. I want to talk about Watch Dogs, just really quickly.
Okay, yeah, I cut that off my list.
Okay.
I put it on there as a joke for a second. I was like, nah.
No. Watch Dogs was never in contention for my top 10, but that's kind of what I feel like honorable mentions are for sometimes.
Sure, yeah.
Which is just to say, I played at least 40 hours of Watch Dogs.
I played a good, like, 20 or something.
And I did enjoy most of that. Yeah. And I don't want to just pretend that was a terrible game, because it wasn't. It wasn't
terrible.
Had a lot of good stuff in it, had a lot of fun ideas. It does not work as a package. It does not work cohesively. The story is as bad as I have ever seen in a video game. The campaign is as dull as I've ever seen in an open-world video game. But what it does well, there's something that kept me playing for 40 hours.
Yeah.
Because I had other games to play at the time. There's always other games to play. And I just wanted to mention that as a gaming experience in 2014, I sank a lot more time into Watch Dogs than I did some of the games in my top 10.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's just worth mentioning.
Yeah. It's like, the Watch Dogs, it's like, there's a lot of parts of it that are really well designed. Like, the combat's fun and stuff. Mm-hmm. And some of the side missions are really fun to do. But it's like, the ultimate game just ends up feeling incredibly shallow. At least that's how I felt about it.
No, I agree.
At the time, I was like, I just can't play this anymore, and I'm just going to stop.
I agree.
Yeah.
But, like, I'm playing Grand Theft Auto 5 right now. I enjoyed driving and stuff like that more in Watch Dogs. There were just little things that, I think Grand Theft Auto 5, obviously, as a package, works immensely better. All parts of that game.
Without a question.
I think I have quibbles with campaign, but as an open-world gameplay mechanic, all parts of Grand Theft Auto 5 click.
Yeah.
You can't say that about Watch Dogs. There are individual things it does better than other open-world games I've played, and I wouldn't want to just ignore that.
Yeah.
So.
It's a game that, like, I hope when Watch Dogs 2 comes out, that they've learned a lot of lessons, because there's a really good game in Watch Dogs, obviously, because it was like the game that everyone was originally super excited for new consoles about, because like that was the game that Ubisoft had that crazy reveal before the new consoles were even out, and they're like, well, this is going to be coming out on something we just can't say. And it's like, oh, this is like the next generation of video games, and then it actually comes out and you're like, this, like the graphics don't look as good as this original reveal, and a lot of like some of the gameplay ideas, like the hacking stuff, just feels like it's not fully utilized. And oh my god, this map. What the fuck is with this map and all the the just incredible variety of nonsense that you can just like random bullshit that you never want to do in those games, but like somehow you feel compelled to sometimes.
Now I'm remembering that the way I played Watch Dogs was going against what the game wanted me to do, and I would go into crowds and use the hacking mechanic to profile people, learn if they had done something bad, and kill them.
Yeah.
As a vigilante. I turned into a serial killer playing Watch Dogs.
Does not surprise me. That tends to happen to you when you play open world games.
It does indeed. I spent 2 hours in Grand Theft Auto 5 the other day trying to get a police car so I could pull people over, get out, and shoot them in the face. The problem is when you pull them over and get out of your car, they pull away.
I've done some fucked up. I did some fucked up shit in GTA 5. That game's fun.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
Too bad that game didn't come out this year, technically.
Yeah.
Or else it would be up on my list too.
Okay. Well, it was on your list last year.
Yeah.
So all good. All right, so that's enough for honorable mentions. Let's go ahead and get into the list. Sean, what was your number 10 best video game of 2014?
My number 10 game for 2014 is Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. Shadow of Mordor. As someone who actually gives a shit about Lord of the Rings would say, which I can't say that about most of the people that designed the game. So Middle-earth is a game that I feel really conflicted about. Where
you don't say!
Yeah, it's a game that's like the game, like, because if anyone's listening to this is following like other websites top 10 lists, you'll probably notice that Middle-earth is like it's either Middle-earth or Dragon Age are like the two games that are number one on like everyone's list. I don't understand why either of those games would be number one on anyone's list, but like Middle Earth is a game that clearly I had a lot of fun with. I think it is a good game, and it's a game worth playing. But there are a lot of people that had way more fun with it than I did. And so I don't necessarily fully understand how it has quite the level of praise that it gets. Because there's one thing about the game that is really, really good, and that's the Nemesis system. And I talked about this when I played it before and talked about it on the podcast, but I'll just sort of reiterate. The Nemesis system is basically this overall governing AI system of all these orcs. So you have this hierarchy of orcs on the map, and there's all these like orc captains, and then like orc chieftains and orc war chiefs, or however it stratifies out to. And so you sort of can... All those orc captains have unique properties, like some of them are invulnerable to stealth. Some of them are afraid of fire, so if you use a fire attack near them, they will run away and be easier to kill or something like that. And so it creates a really interesting dynamic of that all these orc captains are just kind of out in the world, wandering around, other than the top like war chiefs who are in their strongholds, and you need to like invade their war strongholds to get the war chiefs to come out. And so the fun thing about the game is encountering these random orc captains, and the presentation there is really good because it's like you'll attack them and you'll like clash, and the camera will zoom in on the orc captain, and his name will come up, and he's like Thog the Karagor Rider or something, and he'll say something dumb to you like, "I'm going to slit your fucking throat, mate," because they all have British accents. And do
they say fucking in that game?
Yeah, like not a lot, but they definitely do. And you're like, oh,
J.R.R. Tolkien would be so proud.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so then, all that presentation is really great because the orc models are fantastic. Their faces are really well animated, and most of the orc captains look really unique. Though at some point when you play the game enough, you see like the same types come up, like, oh, this is like Ballsack the Assassin, and I just killed another assassin like 2 hours ago. And so, but they have all these unique traits, and you do feel like a huge amount of work went into that, and that's really cool. My main problem with it is that I think that would be a system that would work really great in a game that had better mechanics in it. And so my main complaint with the game is that the mechanics are fun to engage with, but they are like the most shallow video game mechanics I think I've ever really encountered. And that it's basically the Batman... it is the Batman combat ripped out of Batman, but it's not as tight as it was. They simplify it immensely by giving you all these abilities that you can unlock that are just like... halfway through the game, you are just literally invincible. You know, you can walk into a room with 100 orcs in it and only get hit once or twice when you fuck up and do just something kind of stupid. But you would, I died maybe twice in the whole game. And the whole point of the Nemesis system is that when you die, what happens is that time passes, and, the orc that killed you, he gets, promoted and stuff and becomes more powerful. And it's called the Nemesis system because it's supposed to create those sort of relationships where it's like, goddamn you, Balzac the Assassin, you killed me, and now you're like a war chief, and so I have this relationship with you, and it tries to push that so much that at the end of the game, you your nemesis is supposed to come out, and it's one of the big mission, and he comes out, and it's like, this is supposed to be the guy that I've been fucking trying to get the whole time, and I could never get him. But I never developed that relationship with the game because you become so powerful that, again, I died twice, and both of them were completely avoidable deaths. And so, at the end of the game, some orc came out, and it was like, this is supposed to be my nemesis. And it was like, fight your nemesis. And it was like, I don't know who this guy is. I think it literally just spawned some random orc captain with made a new one, because I've killed everybody. I killed everybody the first time I met them, because the stealth is also, super simplified. As soon as you get into a encounter with anyone, you can basically run behind a bush, and everyone will lose sight of you. You can climb every single object in the game in the manner of, in the span of half a second. He's just leaping up towers and shit. And so the game ultimately becomes a really fun power fantasy, and I don't want to completely trash it for that, because I did enjoy my time with the game. But the overall impact of it at the end of the day is just I walked into a room and cut off 100 orc heads, and that's kind of cool, but there was never any challenge. I never felt threatened. There's no difficulty levels in the game, which is also really disappointing. And so it's at the end of the day, I enjoyed it, but with Watch Dogs, it's I found the experience completely forgettable. Other than that, the Nemesis system is a really cool idea that needs to be applied in a better game.
A Batman game.
Yes, which is what it was originally going to be. With the combat sharpened up, like making it more difficult, putting in a fucking... I don't understand why there aren't difficulty levels in this game. Because that could have solved like a lot of my problems if it was just harder.
Well, and we did an episode on this a couple months ago, and you went into detail on all of this. But yeah, like as you said, if you had died in some fights because the difficulty were higher, that nemesis system would have meant something.
Yeah, exactly. It would have like made the game memorable in a way that to me it just isn't. And then there's one other big problem with the game, which is this, and this is the main reason why. Like I can see that. Because I understand that, like, I've played those Batman games to death and stuff like that, so I'm better at the combat than most people are probably going to be. Like, even, like, people who, like, game journalists and stuff. So I understand that, like, my problems with that side of the game are partially very personal. I think some of it is just poorly designed to just, like, make it just feel like you're really powerful without you ever having to earn it, which I don't like that much in games. But I can understand why some people would really like that part of the game. The part that I don't understand how it's getting all the acclaim it's getting is that the story missions are just awful. Like, they're so boring, they're so rote, they just feel like no effort got put into the like main campaign of the game, because all the effort went into making this nemesis system and this cool, like, big open world with all these orc captains fucking around in that world. And that's, like, the fun thing to do with the game. And then you just have this story mission side where, like, twice in the game... they just basically say, like, fuck it, just kill 5 orc chiefs. Just, like, go, like, that's just basically the objective. It's just to kind of mess with the nemesis system for, like, an hour, because that's more fun than any mission we could possibly design. And then the story is just complete fucking trash. Like, it's so bad. It's like, really awful Lord of the Rings fan fiction. And, like, I mean that in the sense that they put Gollum in the game and literally just... I mean, not literally, but almost literally take lines from the Two Towers and just have Gollum say that. I mean, they do just literally reconstruct the relationship dynamic between Frodo, Sam, and Gollum from the Two Towers movie and just put that in the game. And it doesn't make any sense why it's in the game. It's just like, we're doing that again. And then later in the game, you encounter a monarch, but that monarch happens to, like, is, like, acting really weird, and then you find out, oh, that's because Saruman is possessing this monarch. That's really... exactly the thing that happened to Theoden in the Two Towers. That's really weirdly specific that we're just doing that again.
I played a couple of hours of Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, found none of it interesting personally, but when I got to the Gollum part, that's when I quit, because it's like, I can't be interested in this. If I want to watch the Two Towers, I will watch the Two Towers. It's better than this. Yeah,
it's something that it's like you see how far the treatment of the Tolkien material has come now, where it's like, the Lord of the Rings movies took their liberties with it, but they took their liberties, like, well. I think they did it in a smart way. I really like those movies. I think they adapted the material well. But it has, like, slowly, that, like, opened it up to, at this point, like, you're playing Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, and, like, orcs are cussing, and you're just walking in a room and cutting off 1,000 orc heads in, like, 2 seconds, and you're just like... isn't, like, the whole point of the Lord of the Rings at some point that, like, you don't have to be this big, strong dude, that's, like, it's your, like, steadfastness and determination in the face of hardship and evil that really will win the day?
Yes, in fact, if they really paid attention to the Peter Jackson films, they'd notice that the big emotional coda to the series is, no, we bow to you.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, like, man, Aragorn, you're a fucking badass, man, like, go kill some more fucking orcs. Yeah, like, that's not... what those... That's not what that story is. That's not what those movies are.
I messed up the line of one of my favorite movie moments of all time. It's, you bow to no one.
Yeah, you bow to no one.
And I cried at that scene.
But then they did bow to them, so I understand why you messed it up.
Okay.
Yeah, so again, I don't want to just rag on the game.
It sounds like we're doing a 10 worst games.
Yeah, because it's like... I feel like the game, like, so many people sing the praises of this game, and a lot of it I do agree with. Like, there are a lot of stuff in the game that's really good, but it's not that good. I don't like, and that's part of the reason why I have this reaction is that also I was a lot more excited for the game than I should have been, because I heard of, like, all the praise it was getting, and then I was playing it. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I can literally just stand here and mash the fucking triangle button and I can win basically every single fight. Like, in the game, at some point, the mechanics are so shallow that it just plays itself. And the only way it becomes hard in any way, the only way you ever die in the game is if you just are an idiot, It's just if you run into a situation that you can't win and you just decide to keep on hammering on square instead of trying to use the stealth. Like, that's the only way you can ever die in the game, so...
Alright, so that's your number 10?
That's my number 10.
My number 10 game of the year was definitely a case of going with my heart over my mind in one of these choices. This is the video game Entwined. For the PlayStation 4, also came out for the Vita and the PS3. Sort of an indie game from, it's kind of overseen by Sony.
It's a new studio.
Yeah, new studio overseen by Sony. This game was probably best known for how it was announced, which is at E3 this year, Sony did this whole part about their indie commitment on the PS4 and then said, and we've got this cool game Entwined, and you can buy it right now. And that was a really interesting thing that they did, and I did go and buy it right then. And really no one talked about the game after that. I saw a lot of dismissal of it when people actually got around to playing it. This, however, is the kind of indie game experience that I really value and enjoy, and I always try to find a place for on my year-end lists. You'll remember I talked a lot about Proteus last year, for instance. And I like these. I like games like Proteus and Entwined. They're very different, but I like these games where I feel like playing it is almost an act of meditation. How different is this than Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor?
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But no, Entwined...
No, Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, that's an act of meditation, because again, the game basically plays itself. Okay. So you're just like... You just act, like, you just respond to the world around you in Middle-earth, man.
Yes.
Like, there's just orcs coming at you, and you don't even think, you just hit triangle and their head flies off. That's all it is, bro.
So the mechanics of Entwined are very simple. So the screen is kind of split in half, and you play as this bird and this dragon, I think. And you control them with the two thumbsticks, and they kind of have to fly in unison, kind of this matched kind of flying mechanic.
It's almost as if they're like entwined with one another. Yeah.
Indeed. And you kind of go through these courses, and like you'll see a blue shape, and the blue creature has to hit the blue one while the orange one hits the orange one, and it becomes a little more complex as it goes along. Never becomes what I would call a really difficult game necessarily, but there was just an emotional response to this game that was more powerful than a lot of what I felt in 2014 with video games. Because I love that feeling when I play a game like this. And I just kind of... It's like zoning out, but zoning out while being kind of active and aware. Where you play the game and you're so in love with kind of the graphics and the music. The game has beautiful music. One of the best soundtracks of this year. In games, movies, TV, whatever. It's just gorgeous score. And you just kind of fall into it and you think about things... maybe related to the game, maybe not, while having, an enjoyable time with it. And it kind of opens up this different state. And I think that's something a game can do that movies don't necessarily do, TVs don't necessarily do, but you definitely can get that with games once in a while. And I like that we're seeing that on consoles now, something that can be announced at E3 and has this kind of experience and effect. If someone said they didn't enjoy Entwined, I wouldn't argue with them on that. It is a very personal kind of thing I'm talking about, I feel like.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't relate to games in this way, and that's fine. But I was not happy with what I had at number 10 on this list, and then I remembered that I played this, and I loaded it up on my Vita to try it one more time, and I got right back into the zone with it, and I'm like, this was a really great experience on some level. On a lot of levels, and I loved it, and I don't have anything negative to say about it. Definitely one of the 10 games of the year for me, and certainly if a top 10 list is a personal statement of what your year in gaming was and what it meant to you, this game had to be on there for me. And I really do recommend it if you're looking for something different. If you like games like Journey and Flow, what's the studio that makes those?
That game company. Studio.
Yeah,
that game's company.
If you like their kind of games, Entwined is a similar aesthetic and kind of style, and I think you would like this too. So you can get it on any of the PlayStation consoles. So
yeah.
All right, so that's my number 10. Sean, what's your number 9?
My number 9, which also is my number 1 best game title of the year, but it's only my number 1 favorite game of the year. That is Persona 4: The Ultimax Ultra Suplex Hold, also known in the United States as Persona 4 Arena Ultimax.
Also my favorite game title of the year, although I have not had the chance to play it yet.
So, obviously, if you've ever listened to the podcast, obviously Persona is a thing with us. I was going to just stop there. I don't know, this could almost be the whole conversation. But, so basically, if you don't know what the game is, it's a sequel to a game called Persona 4 Arena, which was a fighting game spin-off from the beloved series of JRPGs of Persona. Although specifically, it takes the cast of characters from Persona 4, and then brings in some of the characters from Persona 3, who are now 3 years older from the events at the end of that game, and sort of mixes them together. And it's a really interesting mix, and this applies to Arena and Ultimax, in that it has a really in-depth story component that is primarily told in the style of a visual novel, which, for those who don't know, is basically Like it's basically like a story that has like the graphics of a game in terms of like it just like kind of like brings up like character portraits when there's dialogue happening and stuff like that. But it's mostly just sort of like reading it, but you have like the music and stuff, and there's some like sort of visual effects, but it's primarily sort of like a reading experience. And so you have this story told in the form of a visual novel, with which every once in a while you take control of one of the characters and have a fight. But the story is mainly the visual novel. But then on the other side of it, it has a bunch of other modes, and particularly for Arena Ultimax, I think one of the things that's really great about the game is that it expands on the single-player modes in a really significant way, in that you have your basic arcade, which is just like pick a character and then fight through like more or less the whole rest of the roster with like some random bits of dialogue. This is basically like the single-player mode of a fighting game if you were at like an arcade and played on an arcade cabinet, if you would somehow manage to do that today in America. That's the mode you would be playing.
If you flew to Japan, let's be
exactly, because that's how these games came out originally, is as arcade machines in Japan. But then also, Arena Ultimax has a really interesting mode called the Golden Arena mode that sort of takes some of the RPG mechanics from the games in terms of it's kind of like a survival mode, and that you go in, you fight a character, and if you take damage in that fight, you only recover some of your damage, so that's somewhat permanent throughout your sort of like Golden Arena run. But then you're slowly leveling up that character through each run and like gaining experience and getting some like buffs that are all named after like Rakukaja, which is a move in Persona. And so that will mean like, oh, now when I use Yu Narukami in the Golden Arena mode, he will have like 5% more damage or something like that. And so it's a really fun mode for someone like me that's not particularly good at fighting games and is very intimidated by playing against people online, because I'm not like good. I haven't played enough fighting games to understand like the mental like mind game aspect of it. I just like just sort of like fucking around and using the special moves and stuff. And so that's one of the things that really, I was almost not going to put this game on this list, but then I thought about how much fun I had with that mode in particular, and sort of was able to justify to myself that like this game allows someone like me who's not usually into fighting games to be able to play it and like engage with the mechanics and have a lot of fun. And really, I feel like I'm starting to learn how to play fighting games by playing it. And it's one of the very few fighting games I think you can find that like makes concessions to new players, because fighting games are so, like, if you picked up Street Fighter 4, like, that game's completely fucking impenetrable. Like, the only thing it has is like it has like a challenge mode or something that's like, hey, like, input this and do this combo, but like figure out the timing for yourself and figure out why you would want to do this combo at any point in the match for yourself. And it's like, I don't know any of that stuff. Like, I don't know why I would want to use this like rising uppercut, jump Hadouken, like fucking falling kick. Like, I don't know when to use that. I don't know why to use that. I don't know how to use it, because you're not explaining the timing on it. It's so specific. Like, I don't know how to talk about fucking, like, for animation frames in terms of doing moves in these games. Like, that's so far above my head that I feel like Persona 4 Arena Ultimax really has a lot of modes and has, like, really in-depth tutorial stuff. It doesn't go all the way that I would want it to go, but it goes far enough that I feel like it gives me the tools that I can really try to learn some of it for myself. And then beyond that, like, and then also, like, it is just really fun to play. Like, the fighting mechanics of it are very just sort of tactilely satisfying, and it has expanded a lot on what its Persona 4 Arena had to offer in terms of fighting, including, like, the new characters and stuff. But then even beyond that, I think the story mode, while not perfect, if you're a fan of Persona 4, and particularly Persona 3, I think the story mode is a lot of fun to go through. It's something that it has some problems. In particular, the Persona 4 side of the story is a little bit dull because a lot of the characters have not progressed at any point, especially when you consider that you've already had Persona 4 Arena. And so, like, those characters from Persona 4 are, like, no older, really. Like, they haven't done anything since the end of Persona 4 to make them interesting. The one part in the Persona 4 story that's really good, but it's kind of sparse, is when Adachi comes into the story, and there's some really, really interesting stuff with his character. But again, that's only kind of part of it. The real great part of the story mode is the Persona 3 side of the story, and that's because, one, like, even with the returning cast, there's still a lot of interesting stuff to do with, like, what is Akihiko like 3 years ago, like 3 years after the end of that last game, or what is Mitsuru like? Even if we have had Persona 4 Arena, I feel like you don't fully understand that. But then they also bring back Yukari, Ken, Koromaru, and Junpei, and Fuka plays a much larger role in this one. And so you get to see those characters 3 years later, and it made me remember, it's like, I fucking love Junpei. Like, he's a great character, and they've brought all those characters to like really interesting places. Where Junpei is like, he's going to college, but he's also in his spare time he teaches like a little league baseball team, which is fucking perfect for his character. And then Yukari is gotten into some modeling and acting, so she's basically like the Pink Power Ranger more or less on this TV show, and that's fantastic because she's wearing like a Pink Power Ranger uniform, and everyone's making fun of her for it. And so, like, she's gotten to, like, a really interesting place.
I need to stop this podcast right now and go play Persona 4 Arena 2.
Yeah, it's just, like... And then also, they've managed to make Ken, I think, into an actually interesting character.
Say what?
He's not, like, he's not as interesting as the other ones, but since he's, like, kind of the age that the Persona 3 characters were at in their own game... Like, you know, the main cast were in high school. Since he's, like, there now, it's kind of interesting to see him dealing with these issues of, like, everyone he's friends with is so much older than he is, and they're, like, like, living their lives, going to college and stuff, and he's kind of stuck as a kid. That it's, like, his arc in the game I actually found really interesting, and kind of, like, they've finally given him something to do as a character, and I, like, appreciate it, and he's also not, like, a little snot-nosed brat anymore, so that kind of helps. Yeah. And Koromaru, because they're actually really interesting to play as, because Ken and Koromaru, the dog, are paired up as a fighting character, and so a lot of their mechanics are really interesting, where some of your moves, like, sort of command Koromaru to do stuff, so you can, like, set up attacks in the future using Koromaru, and then, like, kind of move in with Ken and kind of plan things out.
We are really being spoiled by these Persona spin-offs.
Yeah.
They are so good.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And then, like, the biggest thing, I think, though, about the Persona 3 story, and this only counts... if you play Persona 4 Arena, which by the like the story mode in this game is like a direct sequel to that one, so it's like you cannot play the story mode in this without having played it, but you can download the story from Persona 4 Arena to play through in Ultimax, so that's a really nice way to sort of like get the full experience. But the best part about the Persona 3 story is that effectively the main protagonist of it, like as opposed to Narukami, the protagonist of Persona 4 and the Persona 4 side of things, the main character for the Persona 3 one is basically the new character from the last game, Labris, who's basically Aigis' sister. She's also a robot character. And her story in Persona 4 Arena was what made that really worthwhile. And so the thing that kind of like really connects the game and binds them is that her character arc sort of sustains through it, and she experiences a lot of really interesting character development, and especially there's some really, really touching stuff at the end of the game, because her story is like, I don't want to spoil any of it, but she went through some like seriously fucking horrific stuff that like kind of brought her to be a sort of villainous role in Persona 4 Arena, and she never fully had time to deal with it. So it's like this game, part of like the arc of this game is her having to deal with some of that stuff that she just didn't have time to in the last game, and sort of coming to be like kind of really fulfill herself by the end of the game. So I think the story mode has some, even if it has a lot of sort of parts of it that I think like aren't bad but aren't super interesting, I think the Persona 3 side of things really sustains itself in a way that if you're a fan of these games, I think it's really, really worthwhile to experience.
Awesome. I can't wait to play this. I should note, I just learned Persona 3, the movie number 2, is going to be on Blu-ray in the States in March, and we'll be talking about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Going to have to rope some money together for that incredibly expensive set, but there you go. Persona. So much Persona all the time, even when it feels like there's not a lot of Persona.
Yeah.
All right. My number 9 game of 2014 is Mario Kart 8 for the Wii U. Mario Kart's always fun, but it's always kind of variable whether you're going to get the Mario Kart that feels like, man, they really nailed this one. I didn't think I needed more Mario Kart. This one's really fun. Or you're going to get the Mario Kart that's like, there's some fun stuff in this, but overall, meh.
Yeah.
And Mario Kart 8 came on the right side of that equation. It definitely feels like we alternate. If you go back to, I don't know, like Mario Kart DS is one of the best Mario Kart games. It really feels like they hit that one out of the park. Then we got the Wii version, which had a lot of good stuff and a lot of motion controls.
Oh,
Let's just put it that way.
Fuck that. God damn. Trying to play Mario Kart with the fucking, like, wheel. That was unbearable.
And then I thought Mario Kart 7 for the 3DS was a very boring Mario Kart. It was the slowest one they'd ever made, just in terms of speed, or at least in the modern era.
Yeah.
It just, the tracks weren't that interesting. They didn't add much to it. And then we got Mario Kart 8. And I think Mario Kart 8 proves, if nothing else, that having the graphical power of the Wii U at their disposal has made Nintendo's artists so much more energized, I feel like, than they maybe have been in recent years. Because, obviously on the Wii and 3DS we've had some phenomenal games, but I think in certain entries of certain ongoing series like this to, change a huge amount, because they are what they are, having... Mario Kart 8 is just one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. This year, any year, it is a gorgeous game. It runs at this beautiful 60 frames per second. It has a phenomenal sense of speed, more than Mario Kart really has had probably since Double Dash and maybe ever. It just, moves at this amazing kind of clip and pace. And it's just the art direction of every single stage is so much fun, and I love that side of it. And the art direction on the characters is fun, and the music is beautiful. And I think overall, just having that extra power at their disposal has made for probably the definitive Mario Kart so far, in that it has everything you would want from all the other ones. Not that you could ever want, because that would be every single track, and that's unfeasible. But, it's got, the mechanics they've got down pat at this point. It controls so well. I feel like I'm much more in control of my kart than I ever have been in a Mario Kart game. It just feels really fluid and solid on that level. The tracks, as I said, are beautiful. Definitely the best assortment of tracks I think they've had in a Mario Kart game. Good mix of the old with the new, and the new ones are just phenomenal. And, the mechanics that have been added are somewhat shallow, because the big new thing here is the anti-gravity kind of stuff.
Right.
But... if you consider that Mario Kart is kind of just this candy popcorn game that you play with your friends or you play alone, and it's just kind of, it's a sugary video game where you just play it and have fun for maybe 30 minutes and then you go do something else. Man, it achieves that so well, because that anti-gravity stuff is just part of the spectacle of the game, and you can manipulate these tracks in such interesting ways with that, and it just plays great. But I will say, the thing that got Mario Kart 8 definitively on this list in specifics is the DLC. Because in a year that I feel like had a lot of... kind of proved to me how useless DLC is on most levels these days.
Sure.
That it's just, you pay your $20 and get 2 little pieces of content that's not worthwhile and doesn't even feature stuff from the main game. Whatever. There's a lot of bad DLC that, I paid for the expansion pass for Destiny and I haven't even touched the DLC because I don't give a shit. Mario Kart 8... the first DLC pack was $8. It gave you 3 characters, 3 carts, a bunch of customizations, and 8 new tracks. That's like a fifth of what's in the game itself, all over, for $8, less if you buy the quote-unquote season pass. I forget what Nintendo calls it. They don't call it a season pass. And there's more of that to come. And those tracks were the best tracks in all of Mario Kart 8. And you got to play as Link. And you got to hear Legend of Zelda music. And
then it just makes you think, it's like, why the fuck why is this series still Mario Kart? Or why is it still Mario Party? Why haven't they just Smash Brothers up every series they have at this point?
They should, but for now...
because don't they have every single Koopa-ling in
they do.
Mario Kart 8? How desperate are you to pad out the roster of characters that...
Oh, you want to hear about desperation? Let me tell you. There are 4 versions of Peach in this game.
That's right, I forgot. Yeah,
there's Peach, there's Baby Peach, there's Pink Gold Peach, and in the DLC there's Cat Peach.
It's
which will fulfill all your furry fantasies.
How sad is it that they've had to make a Metal Mario equivalent of Peach now?
Yeah.
When are we going to have the Peach?
Yeah.
The Weech. I don't know what you call the Wario version of Peach, but when is that going? It's around the corner, right? We're running out of everything. When do we get woed?
Well, I was going to say, that would be my biggest complaint with Mario Kart 8 is the roster could have been a lot tighter. I would be okay with having just the 10 racers and maybe some costumes on them. That's okay, guys. But for now, that DLC definitely was okay, Nintendo knows how to do DLC in a way that is affordable and substantive and a good deal and keeps their game alive. Because if any game I feel like merits DLC, Mario Kart is a perfect example. That'd be great.
As far as Nintendo franchises go, absolutely.
Because that kept me coming back to the game, and I've had so much fun with it recently because that DLC got me back into the game, got me realizing what the game does well, and it is just a blast. Definitely one of the most fun games I've played this year. And, the Mario Kart series is so good. When they hit one really out of the park and you feel like, all right, this is the new go-to Mario Kart game that I'd want to play with friends, that's worth recognizing for me. So,
I think that they should make a good version of Bowser called Wowzer.
Okay. Wowzer?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Mario would have to say it, and it would just be crazy. All right, so Sean, let's move on.
Yes, to my number 8, which is a game I really like, and it's called Luftrausers.
Nice.
It's a game that I think it's on the PS3, the PC, but I played it completely on the Vita. It's a game that I've just been kept on coming back to time and time again this year. And it's something I've talked about, I think, twice on this podcast now. It's just a game that I kind of go in phases with. And it's the kind of game that I usually don't get into these sort of like, because Left 4 Hours is basically this sort of like 2D, old school sort of air combat game. And it's sort of like, each sort of run, it probably lasts like 2 to 3 minutes. Like, you get killed super quickly, and it's kind of just like a score game in the sense of like, you chart your progress by how well you're able to play and how much score you're able to get. I usually never really get into score games because I just don't give a shit. But there's something about Left 4 Hours that's just so satisfying to play. It's got this incredible sense of weight and gravity to the ship that, like, it's so hard to explain, but just feels so right. The game is such an asshole in how aggressive it's designed, in that if you want to get points, you have to sort of build your combo meter, and so obviously you need to kill things to build up your combo meter. But if you're not killing, like if you don't increase your combo meter by killing something, you have a very short amount of time before it runs out. And the only way you can heal in the game by using like your generative health is if you're not shooting. So it's like there's this constant push and pull between like, I need to be killing stuff to keep my combo up, but if I'm firing right now, I can't regain my health, and you only have a tiny amount of health. And so that loop is incredibly addicting. But the thing that really pushes it over the edge is that you unlock all these... There's 3 different parts on your ship, and there's probably like 8 different... there's 3 different kinds of parts and like 8 different variations, basically. Between it's like your weapon, your chassis, and your engine, and they all have different effects. And just the different kinds of ships you can make are really crazy. Like there's one where that if you crash into ships, you don't take any damage, and you do more damage by crashing into things. So it sort of makes it so that you don't necessarily need to be using your guns a whole lot, because you can just like basically fly into things and kill them that way. But the counter is that you have a lot less health if you use that chassis. So there's a lot of the different things like that where using this part will give me this advantage, but it means that like I will have to work harder at not getting hit, or like I will have to, there's one that's really cool that like it allows you to go underwater because there's sort of like this air-sea battle. That one's really interesting. And then the other really cool part about that part of the game is that there's basically one song, but that song, like different parts of the song change based on the different parts you put on your ship. So it's kind of like different tracks get leveled on, and the song is really, really fucking cool. And you don't notice at first that that's what's happening, is that the song is slightly modulating based on what like your ship is composed of, until I started playing on random settings where it just like does random ones, and then you see that it's like, oh, this song like drastically changes if you just like fluctuate between like completely different kinds of ships. And it's just a tremendously well-made game that's so much fun to play for just like short spurts, and is incredibly intense, and yeah, so it's my number 8.
I put Left 4 Hours on my Vita, and I couldn't figure it out. I should go back to it.
It has a bit of a learning curve. You would play with the D-pad, because I tried playing with the analog stick at first, and that's completely impossible, because you just basically need to turn your ship and go forward and back.
Okay.
Yeah, like you give it a little bit of time, because it definitely has a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah, definitely. I will definitely check it out. I'm glad I had forgotten that you loved this game so much, so that's a good one, yeah.
So good.
All right, so my number 8 game of the year is, continuing on a theme, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker for the Wii U, which, if you had told me at the end of last year that I'd be putting a game called Captain Toad Treasure Tracker on my top 10 next year, I'd be like, what the fuck is Captain Toad Treasure Tracker?
Yeah.
First off. But yeah, so this game, if you don't know, is sort of based on these mini levels that were in Super Mario 3D World, the big Mario game for the Wii U, which was one of the best games of last year. I didn't get to that until this year, otherwise it would have been pretty high on my top 10 list last year. Really good Mario game. But those Toad levels, where you play as Captain Toad on these sort of box maps where it's all about kind of manipulating the camera and finding things, those were not my favorite parts of that game. In fact, they felt more like a chore than anything in that game. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't really sure when they said, we're going to make a full game out of basically those levels. That did not necessarily sound like a great idea to me. But, it looked better and better the more I saw it, and it's a $40 game, and I basically got it for Christmas, and started playing it, and I really fell in love with Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. It is a very, very good Nintendo game. Definitely shows off just, they have elevated platforming to an art at this point, and they've shown that they can do very different kinds of platforming now with this.
I was going to say, would you even really call it a platformer, or would you more call it like a puzzle game at some point?
I guess it's kind of both. I would combine that, because there is some... maybe puzzle game is the best thing. I mean, there is manipulation of Toad that goes on. The big thing is that Captain Toad cannot jump.
Yeah.
So that creates...
his backpack's really heavy, right?
I guess so, maybe. And he's got that light on his head. But yeah, so Captain Toad can't jump, but you have to go through these levels, and they're in kind of this, as I say, box orientation. So, like, if you've ever played Fez, it's a little like that, in that the camera manipulation is a big deal in this game. And sometimes you use the gamepad for certain things that'll go on the screen, if you're familiar with the Wii U setup of that gamepad mechanic. So anyway, but they're just, every level is this wonderful little lesson in creativity and how there's just so many nice little visual quirks going on. You have to find a gold star in each level to finish it, but there's also 3 diamonds and another random, not random, but another that you won't know going in, like assignment you have to do that you'll learn after the fact. So you kind of play through each level a couple of times to 100% it, and you really get to know each level, and they all kind of stand on their own. They're really great, and it kind of goes back to something I think they've been doing since Galaxy 2 with the main Mario series, where every level kind of feels like an event and like something really well thought out, and just it's so intricate. As you say, this is more of a puzzle game, but it follows that same kind of aesthetic of they've really thought things out and made really intricate, involved, interesting, platformer style games. And Captain Toad absolutely follows up on that. It is fun to play in short bursts or long ones. I kind of have played it mostly in short bursts. There is a ton of content in the game. I mean, I think there's 3 episodes, as they say, in full, which each have at least 16 or 17 courses. So there's a lot of content to go through in this. They're all fun.
And there's like some bonus levels or something too.
Yeah, if you have Super Mario 3D World, if you have a save on your Wii U, you unlock a whole slate of bonus content, which I think is a little weird. What it is it's levels from Super Mario 3D World that you have to play through as Captain Toad. It is interesting. It turns those platformer levels into straight-up puzzle games, which is really interesting. They're not my favorite part of Captain Toad, because obviously that's not what they were designed for.
Yeah, it's a weird idea of let's take this other completely different game, like a level from that, and just here, you can just be in that level with these mechanics. Seems like that could either be really interesting or just like, what? Why? Yeah. Why would you do this?
But yeah, I mean, Captain Toad, as silly as it is to say, Captain Toad was one of the best games of the year, on a mechanical level, it is just so tight. It is so well done. It's really interesting to play. It kind of gets your mind working in how you're going to solve these puzzles and whatnot. But it's also just a really charming, fun game. The graphics and the music are wonderful and beautiful, and there's just a whole layer of charm to it. Like, the noises Captain Toad makes at the start and end of each level. Or that I like how... So the plot is Toadette has been kidnapped, and you have to go save Toadette.
Because she's the only female Toad, and you need her to reproduce.
Yes. But at the end of episode 1... Captain Toad gets kidnapped, and Toadette becomes the main character, and you have to go save...
He's kind of expendable, right? Go hook up with some General Toad or something. What are you doing fucking around with the captain?
But I like that kind of idea that it's so they just flip it. Now the girl's kidnapped, and that would be fun if at the end of a Mario game, Mario got kidnapped and Peach just had to go save him. I mean, you'd have to play as Peach, and that would kind of suck.
Except for Peach is, going by Mario Brothers 2 standards, the best character to play as.
Yes.
Because she can fucking float.
She can.
Yeah.
It doesn't work
as
well.
Can Toadette float?
No.
No.
Toadette cannot
jump.
That
would be pretty useful.
Yeah.
But why can't Toadette jump?
Because neither of them jump. That's
does she have a really heavy backpack?
Well, let me say, yeah, she has a backpack.
Oh, okay.
She gets Captain Toad's pack.
Okay, never mind. The physics of that now makes sense to me.
There you go. Yeah. So Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, really, really good game for the Wii U, and one of my favorite games of the year, definitely.
So my main question about Captain Toad is he the captain of a ship, or is he in military service, or is he just using that title because he thinks it sounds cool?
Well, Captain Toad does come from Super Mario Galaxy, where I think he's the captain of a starship or something.
Okay, I guess that kind of... Do you think he would have figured out a way to jump even with a heavy backpack if he's the captain of a starship?
Yeah, I don't know.
But okay. I will accept that. In terms of the Mario universe, that makes perfect sense. I was just worried that, because I feel like impersonating a military officer is probably illegal. So
in the Mushroom Kingdom?
Yeah, I was a little bit concerned about Captain Toad and what he was up to.
That makes sense. The lore of Mario
I mean, it's the same thing with Dr. Mario. I mean, Dr. Mario really should just be arrested because it's just Mario, and he doesn't have a fucking medical license.
No, he does not. All right, Sean, let's move on to number 7.
Okay, my number 7 is a game that we already talked about in depth when it came out. It's Infamous Second Son. A game that I had a tremendous amount of fun with.
This happens every year. My number 7 is also Infamous Second Son.
Fucking great!
How does this happen? We do not collaborate on this. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I literally finalized my list 30 minutes before we did this podcast. So Yeah, there's absolutely no way that we planned that out. So I guess we can talk about it at the same time.
We can. It's a great game.
Yeah, I don't know how much more I really want to say about it because we did like a full podcast topic on it.
We did.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a game that I feel like it's so much fun to play, you know. It's just such a fun world. It's not an amazing story, but it's a really well told story. It's a lot more engaging than most video game stories that are like, you know, because most video game stories are kind of like Middle Earth, Shadow of Mordor, where it's just like, kind of fuck you. This is really poorly told. It's like Infamous Second Son. It's like, okay, I like the characters for the most part. Like all the facial animation stuff is fucking amazing. I think like all the acting is good. It's like there are like well defined character arcs. There's like a plot that's like clear and easy to follow. Like those are like very simple rules of storytelling. Most like action based games simply just don't understand how to follow. And this game is like, yeah, okay, like 100%. I am with you on the story. And then the powers are really fun to use. They're incredibly creative. The game looks fucking gorgeous, especially the effects on all the powers. And it's just a really, really fun superhero game. And you don't get like a superhero game all that often.
No. I agree with all of that. And, you know, what it comes down to is Infamous Second Son to me was one of the most purely fun games of 2014. And, you know, you talk about the story. I'm looking at my list. I'm thinking of all the AAA games I played this year. Easily, without any doubt in my mind, Infamous Second Son had the best story in a AAA game I played this year. Not even competition for me on anything else I played this year. There's one better story to me on this list, but it's certainly not a AAA game. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's just, it got basic comic book storytelling right, like the Marvel movies do. I'm never going to say that, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy is a masterpiece of storytelling, but it gets those conventions and does them really well and proves the power of archetypes. Same thing with Infamous Second Son. It's so mechanically tight. I thought their open world Seattle was really fun to be in.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, I played Infamous Second Son all the way through, 100%ed it, and then I went back and played the whole game again, immediately, with no break.
Yeah,
I never, ever do that.
I mean, it's my only platinum on like Sony services.
It would be if I wasn't fucked by the trophies. Yeah. I did platinum it. I don't have a record of it.
Of course you did. Yeah, we all believe you.
Fucking stupid trophies. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's just a really, really well-made game. It also, like, especially when you compare it to something like Watch Dogs, I think, like, Infamous uses its open world really intelligently in that it's like that the Seattle it's not huge. It's not like this massive, expansive open world. It doesn't have 1,000 different kinds of side missions to do. Like that's not even counting how many like times you have to do the side missions. It's like it's a very focused game. It only takes like 12 or 15 hours to complete a full 100% playthrough, and that feels fantastic because it's like it's a really well paced open world game, which is kind of something you can't say off the top of my head about any other open world game that exists, because like every open world game always overstays its welcome with too much random bullshit, and like the story always gets like padded out for some dumb reason because like they want to use some area of the map that they haven't used well enough yet. And like Infamous Second Son avoids those problems by just saying like, we are going to tackle what we need to tackle to make the game we need to make, and just put in this like the quantity of side missions and stuff that we need to just like allow you to spend time in the world and do different activities, and that's it. And then we're done and we're out. It's not Watch Dogs where you open up the map and it's like you can't see the map behind all the different fucking icons on the map, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I should say I think 7654321 on my top 10 list was a virtual tie at a certain point in terms of just I didn't know quite how to rank it, as you say.
Sure.
And, you know, in a different mood, I could have put this at number one. I enjoyed this so much. I think depending on what I wanted this list to say, this could have been much higher. Mm-hmm. Whenever I think about this game, I kind of regret how low I put it, but at the same time, I mean, I'm just glad it's on the list.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to rank all these things, but I mean,
like, the only thing I think that I would say is a real flaw with Infamous Second Son is that it maybe doesn't, like, reach, like, high enough in terms of, like, it doesn't have a ridiculous ambition, but it doesn't need to. You know? Like, that's the only reason for me it's not at something like number one, is because it's like it's a really good game, but it doesn't necessarily go the one step beyond. No. But that's not a huge problem, like, obviously.
I agree with that, and that's just the tiebreaker sometimes you consider.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, ranking things is a silly exercise at a certain point, and the basic takeaway here is, if you haven't played Infamous Second Son, play it. It's so great.
Yeah.
So, that was my number 7. Sean, what's your number 6?
Right. My number 6 is Wolfenstein: The New Order, which I never would have thought that like a Wolfenstein game would ever appear on a top 10 list for me, because it's fucking Wolfenstein. Like, but yeah, no, like Wolfenstein: The New Order is a really, really, really good single-player first-person shooter, which is something that I think is exceedingly hard to find these days. Is a first-person shooter that stands on its campaign alone, because the Wolfenstein doesn't have any multiplayer component whatsoever, not even like a co-op thing. It's just, we've made a fucking first-person shooter campaign, and like that's our goddamn game. And I really respect and appreciate that, especially because it's also not, you know, something like BioShock that's a first-person shooter, but it's also, you know, that has like kind of like an open world RPG like light kind of element to it. It's like, no, like Wolfenstein, it has a skill tree, but that skill tree is just like, hey, after you shoot 100 dudes using dual wielding, like your reload speed increases by like 50%. There's like maybe 15 upgrades you get that are like that, and it's a nice upgrade system because it sort of encourages you to do different tasks to gain like buffs on your character, but there's no sort of like heavy RPG element to it whatsoever. It's built completely on the back of its storytelling, its mission structure, its pacing, and the gameplay, and all that stuff is really, really well done. It's another example of a game that I think in a genre that typically does not tell particularly good stories, Wolfenstein: The New Order tells a really good story. It has really interesting characters. It has a really interesting setting in that the game starts with you in World War II, but then you realize that it's taking place in sort of like an alternate history, and then like it time jumps up to sometime in the 1960s where the Nazis have won World War II, and you are now part of a like resistance movement to try to defeat the Nazis. And so part of that is that there's also all this like Nazi technology that because it's part of how they won the war is that they got all this crazy technology. So it has like laser guns and stuff like that in it. It has a lot of really interesting world building details that like you can find all these different newspaper clippings and like records and stuff. Like there's one tiny backstory detail of that in this alternate reality, the Beatles got recruited by the Nazis to write Nazi propaganda music, and they made a fake Beatles song that's in German. It is really well done too, and you can listen to it. There's a lot of little details like that are fantastic, but I think the main thing that makes it a whole lot of fun to play is that it's paced really, really well, and that the missions are fun in that there's a lot of open areas, there's a lot of downtime, there's a balance between just going out guns blazing and also being able to sort of approach things in a more stealthy fashion and kind of mixing between the two as you play through a level. And so the levels are really well paced, and then there's also just a lot of time to allow character development and the story to just plan out. So like sometimes you return back to a hub base where you can walk around and talk to characters, pick up collectibles, and just kind of fuck around. There are several sections in the game. Like there's one section where you're basically thrown into like a futuristic Nazi concentration camp, and you have to sort of like obviously don't have any of your weapons or anything, and so you have to sort of like navigate around the camp, like listen to people's stories and figure out how to get out. There's a lot of really fun things like that, and that it just paces itself so much better than most games do, because pacing I think is something that in video games they have a really, really hard time tackling, and this game is really well paced without feeling like it puts you on like tracks, you know, and it's like I'm just moving through the game and doing everything that it wants me to do. It allows you a lot of agency in how you approach combat scenarios, and there's one cool part like before the time jump where you basically make a choice of like whether one character lives or die or a different character lives, and that slightly changes some of the events that happens and some of the characters that you meet along the way. And I haven't beaten the game twice, but I got like a certain part along the way and the other one that I didn't pick. And like the changes that are made are not dramatic, but some of them are pretty fucking interesting.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's just a really fun fucking first-person shooter campaign that anyone who's looking for something like that, I highly recommend Wolfenstein.
Awesome. A game I have not really had time to play yet, but I do look forward to someday maybe catching up with.
Yeah.
All right, so it's your number 6, right? All right.
Yes.
My number 6, by far the toughest game to place on this list. Destiny by Bungie.
I'll say it's on my list. It's higher up.
Okay. So I'll just do my piece on it now. We've spent so much time talking about Destiny.
Yeah.
I'll just say, obviously Destiny is flawed. You can't get around. There is way too little content. There's, the story that they did put in there is laughably awful. If you can call it a story at all, they put the wrong balance there. They should have taken it all out or built it up much more.
Yeah.
It's a little too repetitive. I think the end game and the basic loot grind system is kind of awful in a lot of ways, and yet I spent 70 hours playing Destiny this year, and I enjoyed almost every one of them.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line, is that I spent a good chunk of time this year playing Destiny, and I had a lot of fun with it, and it kept me coming back throughout, until the point I realized that there really was no end to this. There was no goal I was working towards that was ever fully attainable. That's when I kind of stopped, and I should have stopped earlier. I got burned out on Destiny, and for a while I kind of felt mad at the game until, I kind of let go of that. I'm like, no, Destiny was good. What Destiny does well, it does better than a lot of other games. I mean, the basic shooting mechanics are as tight and fun and precise and easy to use and just beautiful as any first-person shooter you're ever going to play. Just so perfect on that level. A really great expansion of the work Bungie's done in the past. And I think many of the combat scenarios in the strikes and in the missions are gloriously done. Yeah. There's some repetition to it in that you take your Dinklebot and you put your Dinklebot out and he scans something and does technobabble and you fight a bunch of the enemies. But
he shoots a little laser at a computer console. Yeah. He does that a lot.
As repetitive as those things are to do, they're also really well designed.
Yeah.
And, as I start talking about Destiny, I kind of want to go play Destiny. Because it is a really fun game to play. And that's kind of the basics here. I don't think a video game needs to tell a story to be good. That's fucking stupid. Gaming did not start as a narrative medium. That's not important. If a game tells a great story, awesome, but that's got to be its actual intent. Yeah. That's not the intent of Destiny. The intent of Destiny is to have fun and get you addicted to it. I was addicted for a while, and I had to break that habit, but I definitely had fun along the way. It's beautiful on a graphical level. It's got really good music. I don't think it's a phenomenal score or a great score even, but it's good. It's solid. And it's Destiny.
What about that Paul McCartney song, man?
It's awful. But it got us a great appearance by Paul McCartney on The Daily Show, where he really didn't seem to know what a video game was.
Yeah.
And that music video where he is a hologram on Destiny.
Yeah.
So, fuck it, Destiny, Game of the Year because of the McCartney song. All right. But yeah, we've talked about Destiny on other shows, and you can go hear our opinions on it. But that, for now, my number 6 game of the year. So, Sean.
Yeah. My number 5, a lot like Wolfenstein, is a game that I'm really surprised is on my list at all, without even played it at all, is Call of Duty Advanced Warfare.
Wow, that's that high.
Yeah. Nice. It's Call of Duty. It's a strange beast, It's a game that's like, it's a game that is undeniably amazing, just in terms of how it plays, and also just in terms of like the multiplayer design and stuff is so well done. It's always been really well done. The biggest problem with Call of Duty, like some of its forebears at Activision, like Guitar Hero, is that Activision just puts one out every single fucking year, and at some point you can't play Call of Duty every single year, especially as the campaigns got less and less interesting, the multiplayer got more and more convoluted. It was just like random nonsense thrown in that nobody gave a shit about. Like, eventually Call of Duty was like a really amazing game that you had already played, and they were making it a little bit worse each time it came out, which just kind of made me sort of resent the series. But then once Advanced Warfare came out, it was like, okay, this is a different studio. Sledgehammer Games has never made a Call of Duty game before. It's a completely different setting. They're going even more, they're going further near future, because that's Call of Duty Black Ops 2 was near future. Call of Duty Ghosts was a little more further away near future. This is even further away near future, but it's still technically the near future because it's not crazy space shit. But it's a different setting. It's got different technology and stuff. And then it got really good buzz, and I was like, fuck it, I have not played a Call of Duty since Modern Warfare 2, which was a very, very long time ago. And so I decided to pick up Advanced Warfare, and I have to say, the campaign is not amazing, It's not mind-blowing the way that Call of Duty 4's was, but it is really well made. It doesn't have it as well as Wolfenstein did, but it still has good pacing. It knows when to slow down. It's not, 120% all the time, which is the way I kind of felt Modern Warfare 2 was. This definitely, knows where to go with its story. It's the story's not amazing, but Kevin Spacey's in it, and he pulls in a good performance as a really cartoonish villain that's very predictably a villain because he starts out of the story. It's like, oh, I'm totally the good guy. And it's like, you're not the good guy. It's Kevin Spacey. Who are you kidding? It's also, I think this is the third game on my list that has Troy Baker playing the main character. That also is the second game on the list where the main character also looks like Troy Baker, too, because the Second Son dude looks like Troy Baker, and this guy looks exactly like Troy Baker. So that's a plus. kind of.
Yeah.
But the thing that really pushes it over the edge to me is the multiplayer is really, really, really fucking good. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that, especially when you compare it to Modern Warfare 2, the way that the class system is designed is fucking fantastic, because it blows out all the walls and says, make whatever class you want within reason. You know, with like, you have to make compromises and that you can't have everything on all your classes. But like, if you want to like go in and have an extra like red perk, like fucking go ahead and do it. Like you might have to like drop 2 of the grenades you're carrying, but you can get another perk. Or it's like, man, if you want to carry 2 primary weapons, you can do that, but you might have to sacrifice like this exo ability that you had on. Then it's like, if you want to just like load up on all the fucking perks and grenades you want, but only have a knife, like fucking power to you, man. Like you can go ahead and do that. There's so many ridiculous classes you can make, and that's part of the fun of the game. Is once you like get to about level 30 or so, where you've unlocked like the kind of the breadth of the options available to you, just going in and saying like, fuck it, I'm just going to make, like, the most ridiculous goddamn class I can think of that just, like, try to make, like, the pistol the best weapon by, like, adding all this other stuff on my class. And that's a huge amount of fun that just allows you to play the game how you want to play it. And the other thing that makes it really fun, that also adds, like, an interesting new sort of learning curve to the multiplayer, is the exosuit. That basically, if you've played the Halo 5 beta, it's basically kind of the same concept as, like, you can boost in different directions. You have like a running slide you have, and then you also have a double jump. And the combination of all those things, because you can also boost like boost dash in the air, the combination of all those things allows you to, like, especially on the smaller maps, just traverse like the whole map in a ridiculous short amount of time, where you're just sprinting, you slide, you like double jump and boost again, and you've like leaped over 2 buildings, you know, or you're like leaping up into 2-story windows and getting behind a dude and spraying him with an SMG. It really opens up the mobility in the game in a way that's, it's not like super crazy. It's not like, you know, in like Middle Earth Shadow of Mordor, where you can like scale everything without any effort. Like, it takes really practiced timing and skill. And honestly, it almost kind of reminds me of how I felt like playing older Halo games, and that it's like, if you're really smart about how you approach the environment and where to jump and stuff like that, there are just some really interesting ways that you can kind of get around guys and find ways to move around the map that you wouldn't normally expect. And especially in a Call of Duty game, like, you know, in Call of Duty, traditionally you move at like 2 miles per hour and can like leap over windowsills and small cylinder blocks on the ground, and that's about the extent of your mobility. Whereas this is like, I'm just leaping over fucking buildings and like landing on people and stabbing them in the neck. Like, that's really fun, but at no point does it feel like, you know, like the game's just doing the cool shit for me. It really felt like I have learned how to master this new ability, and then like have to be creative in how I apply it to be able to outsmart, because obviously everyone else has those abilities as well. So like, it creates a really kinetic, frenetic, new kind of Call of Duty multiplayer that I really appreciate, and that I've kept on coming back to in a way that I haven't for most multiplayer shooters these days. Nice. So yeah, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, I think they like really... although one of the things about it that makes me really worried is that like, with the way these Call of Duty games are designed by different studios, is like, what if like Black Ops 3 or whatever doesn't have the exosuit stuff in it, and like Call of Duty's really boring again? That's like my great fear, is that like...
Well, but Advanced Warfare could last you 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, yeah, I don't want to play a Call of Duty every single year, but it's like, it makes me curious to see what that franchise is going to do now that Advanced Warfare has shaken it up more than that franchise has been shaken up since Call of Duty 4, you know?
Yeah, definitely. On a similar theme here, my number 5 is Titanfall.
Yeah.
And Titanfall...
Very similar theme.
Yeah, very similar theme, because, you know...
But not near future in the case of Titanfall. I'm confident saying that it's like far-flung future.
Far-flung future, definitely. But this was kind of kicked off this wave this year of first-person shooters where mobility was the big new thing. Yeah. And I thought Titanfall did it so well. Titanfall is a very traditional first-person shooter in its most basic fundamentals. You know, you run, you shoot, you get kills, all of that stuff. But the things they've layered on top made me more invested in the multiplayer of Titanfall, of this first-person shooter, than I've been since, you know, some of the Halo games, and maybe even not that. I love playing Titanfall. I come to it whenever I feel like I'm kind of bored. Now I'm playing the Xbox One version, which is a lot better. I was playing the 360 version. And anyway, just, I love the fluidity of Titanfall and the mobility of it, as you kind of explained for Advanced Warfare. There's something really fun about being able to just leap over buildings and run across walls and all these things that I think Titanfall does really well. I think it's really tight to play, and I love all of that. And then I think the Titan mechanic is great. It never is not cool to get your Titanfall and watch it drop and get in and go beat some dudes up, even though, if we're being completely honest, if you really want to get kills, probably just stay on the ground. Play as pilot, because the
Titans gets chewed up super fast. Yeah.
But it's like in Pacific Rim, there's probably a better idea to fight the monsters than building giant robots.
No, there's not, because if you don't have the giant robot, you can't take the fucking battlecruiser and hit the robot in the face with it.
But you're
wrong.
That's my point. It's the rule of cool. And Titanfall is cool because you get your giant robot.
But the Titans are not as cool. There's no part in Titanfall where you take a fucking, battleship and hit a fucking monster in the face with it.
No, but I have never seen the face of God so clearly as when I take my Titan and punch another Titan in the face. Yeah. It is just so fun.
The coolest thing that the Titans do is, explode in a nuclear bomb.
It's great.
Yeah, that thing's cool.
Look, I've talked about Titanfall before. I just think it is a blast to play. I feel like I can just settle into its rhythms also more than I do with a lot of first-person shooter multiplayer. Often with multiplayer, I feel like I play a couple matches, then I want to go do something else. Mm-hmm. I can play Titanfall for hours at a time if I'm having fun with it. It's got a super smooth connection. It just plays so well. Even now that the multiplayer audience has dwindled quite a bit, on the Xbox One, I can get a match immediately and it'll keep going. And when you compare that to the Master Chief Collection or the god-awfulness of Grand Theft Auto Online and its terrible netcode,
right? Yeah,
still cannot connect to a fucking match in that piece of shit. Anyway, Titanfall just works, and it works gloriously. It is so much fun, and they've added a lot of great stuff with the DLC. So there's this new mode that's like a co-op horde mode kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's great. It's maybe my favorite thing in Titanfall now. It's so fun to play, and it's an actual challenge, and you get to work with people. I like that they've added that in. No, Titanfall does not have a single-player campaign. No, that is in no way a problem.
But I mean, it has that multiplayer campaign. What a fantastic narrative experience that is, right, Jonathan?
No, it's not.
It's the new wave of multiplayer, single player immersion fusion.
Yeah, but hey, you know what? It's no worse than the narrative stuff in Destiny. I mean, it's the same level.
Yeah,
of stuff.
Sure. I mean, it's different because I think one of the reasons why people want single player is not necessarily for a story. It's more for designed encounters against AI.
No, and I understand that. But I also think, with the amount I've played Titanfall and that I feel like I do understand its systems pretty well, I'm better at Titanfall than I am at pretty much any other first-person shooter at this point.
That's just because Titanfall lets you kill dumb AI bullshit.
No, I kill you. There is a differentiation. There's a differentiation in your points versus one of those. So I do know when I kill pilots. Anyway, but
it has a gun that just shoots people for you.
I really don't. I think the way Titanfall is built, I don't know what a first person, what a campaign would be for that. Structured story campaign.
Especially with the Titan side of it. It's one of the things though that it would be really interesting to see them try to sort of tackle that and find a way. Because if they pulled it off, it could be really cool. I agree that it doesn't immediately jump out at you as well, of course this is what the campaign of this game would be. It's not that.
And I'm glad that they focused on what the game actually is and made it great. And it is great. Titanfall's a really awesome game. It's so much fun to play. I have no major complaints about it. I wish it ran a little better. Even on the Xbox One, which runs at 60 frames per second, there's tearing, and that's a little annoying. Yeah. But other than that, it looks really good. It's got kind of that grungy Call of Duty aesthetic, but done a little more interesting than I feel like Call of Duty games up to Advanced Warfare.
Yeah. Advanced Warfare is a little more.
It looks shinier.
Colorful. It definitely Advanced Warfare does not look like Call of Duty Ghosts.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely a graphical powerhouse.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I just think Titanfall is a absolute blast to play. And it's gotten a second life for me now that I'm playing it on Xbox One, and I'm playing it with my brother Thomas sometimes, and we'll just go into matches together. That adds a whole new level too. So it's been a game that's kind of kept on giving to me throughout 2014 because I played it back in April, and I'm still playing it now every once in a while. And I look forward to the future with that series too. I think Respawn, obviously they used to make Call of Duty.
Yeah,
they were called Infinity Ward, but they really, I think, hit it out of the park their first time out of the gate. And
I'm really
awesome.
excited to see what Titanfall 2 is going to be like.
Titanfall 2, the squeakquel.
Yeah, exactly. But what? Now that they've sort of proven sort of the fundamentals of the game, what they're going to do to sort of mix that up, and then also just expand the game out content wise. I mean, obviously, as you said, they already have started doing that by adding in the survival mode.
Yeah. All right, so that's my number 5, Sean.
My number 4, this is the piece of DLC I was talking about, is The Last of Us Left Behind, which I like, and now we're in the part of the list for me that it's like my top 4 in like very different ways could all basically be number 1. I think in like a very artistic, like sort of narrative kind of sense, Left Behind is the best game of the year to me, in that like in sort of like in an emotional way, no other video game thing I've played this year has affected me nearly as much as Left Behind. I think Left Behind does like everything The Last of Us does amazingly, just on a smaller scale, you know, in like a bite-sized package. That I think the story they tell is really, really amazing. It's incredibly touching, and it also, I think one of the best things about it, especially in like its sort of capacity as a piece of DLC, is that it's not just a prequel, you know, because prequels are usually really bad because I think like usually they just don't justify themselves. It's like,
we'll be talking about that later on.
Yeah. And so like what Left Behind does is that it centers and sort of like anchors the flashback prequel part of the story into the events of The Last of Us, and like a part where there's that little bit of gap where Joel's kind of knocked out and Ellie has to take care of some business. That's like, it allows you to sort of get your grips on like what this story is and how it relates to like the larger narrative of The Last of Us, which is what you want a piece of DLC to do, but it's also what you want a prequel to do, is sort of like allow you to understand the original story in a different light, you know? And so Left Behind, like, I don't know how much I really want to say about it. It's just a really, really well-told story that uses it uses the mechanics of The Last of Us in a really creative way in the flashback settings, and that, like, all the, like, it sort of, you know, thinks about the things that you can do in The Last of Us, and how you can maybe, like, utilize that in a narrative sense in a like live combat kind of setting. And it just tells a really great story with these incredibly well fleshed out characters, with all the flair and the animation and voice acting quality that Naughty Dog is known for and had in The Last of Us, with one of the best characters in video games out there, Ellie, and sort of like flesh out her backstory and let you know a little bit something else about her, while also making it feel tremendously relevant to the story that I already experienced.
Yeah, I was not even considering this for my top 10 just because I wasn't thinking in those terms, like DLC. If I was, it would have absolutely been on my list. This was definitely one of the 10 best gaming experiences of the year. It's always tough when it's a piece of DLC.
Yeah, exactly. But this is, it's so stands for itself,
it does.
You know, that I don't feel any qualms about putting it on.
No, I don't think you're cheating or anything. I just think it is interesting because I hadn't considered it. But yeah, I mean, I think back on when you say The Left Behind, like you say the title of the game, there's something evocative that I just think of. I think of those mall sections, and I think of Ellie trying on the masks, and them getting in the photo booth, and you printing that to Facebook, and all the moments between her and Riley, who you say Ellie's one of the great video game characters. Well, Riley comes out of this as kind of up there too.
Yeah,
in that trifecta with Joel and Ellie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just some of the things this game does, and that absolutely lyrical weaving of past and present that they do in a way all prequels should kind of aspire to at a certain point.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously Naughty Dog had to make this out of some obligation on a publishing level, but they took this very commercial obligation and ran with it artistically. And, you know, if you love The Last of Us, you kind of owe it to yourself to experience this.
And it's like, it also says something like Left Behind was a thing that I was dreading, you know?
Yes.
Because it's like Last of Us was so fucking good. And it's just a really rare example of a video game that just like its story completely stands on its own. It does not demand any further explanation. Because like the events of Left Behind are basically told to you by Ellie at the end of The Last of Us. So it was just sort of a thing where I was like, oh god, prequels are so awful. They're always so fucking awful because they never work on their own, you know? They either like to try to rely too much on the original material without like actually using the original material anyway, and just like feel like really lacking, or they try to stand so much on your own that it just makes you realize that like, oh, like the characters and the setting in the prequel are not as interesting as the original story, and so in comparison they always suffer. It's like this, it's like, no, like they fucking nailed it. Like DLC is usually terrible, and this is amazing. Like this is exactly what you want out of a piece of DLC for a game like The Last of Us, in like a way that I didn't even think was fucking possible, you know, because it was like what you were talking about with Mario Kart. DLC is usually so fucking toxic and awful. Like, see Destiny and how Destiny handled it. It's just like so little content for way too much money, And then usually that content is also just really awkward and feels so stapled on. It's like Left Behind feels like it's rewarding your experience with playing the original game while also being its own rewarding experience in and of its own right, you know?
Yeah. I mean, God, you talk about being worried about this game. I only played it because you played it and said it was worth it.
Yeah.
I didn't trust other critics even. I was like, I trust you.
Yeah.
Because I think I often see a lot of, I feel like video game critics sometimes get caught up in certain pieces of hype.
Sure, yeah.
A la Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor, those sorts of things.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing when I think I asked you, like, you played Left Behind? And you're like, yeah. I'm like, what was it? And you're like, it was amazing.
Yeah,
and then it was just like, okay, well, I have to play this. And it was. I mean, you'll if you go back and listen to the podcast where we talk about Left Behind, before I get like a comment on this, I was a little more down on it. With 6 or 7 months to reflect, when I think back on it and the things that stand out, things stand out on that game more than most of what I played this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, the one thing that, like, the one complaint, which is kind of what you had about it, was that the combat is, like, the combat's good, because it's the Last of Us combat. The main problem with it, which is a little bit of a DLC problem, is that, you know, like, neither of us had played The Last of Us since we had played it originally when this came out, which was, like, 6 months later. So, like, you're so rusty on how to play the game that, like, the difficulty curve is rough, but that's such, like, a minor thing.
It is.
Yeah. But especially because then when I got Remastered Edition, I replayed Left Behind for that, and when, like, you've, like, know how to play Last of Us when that's, like, fresh in your mind, you're not trying to remember the controls, like, it's so good.
I might go play Left Behind now, because I did not play it on the remastered version yet.
Yeah.
So I might need to do that again. So that was your number 4, right?
Yes.
Okay. My number 4 video game of the year is Velocity 2X.
Right. I keep on meaning to play this.
God, you got to play this. So this game came totally out of left field for me. It was this new PlayStation Plus release, kind of the rare thing where it was an original game that was just coming out for free with PS Plus, and I'd never heard of it. I downloaded it automatically, as I usually do with my PS Plus games, and I was getting some rave reviews, and so I had a slow day and I tried it out for no other reason than boredom, and I just got hooked. And it was just kind of this wonderful reminder that, you know, we live in this age of constant gaming hype, but it was this reminder of how nice this, like, real surprise can be when a game you know nothing about can just take you by the horns. I had no expectations, and I just feel like I got one of the year's most just mechanically tight games. And you'll notice I talk about that a lot. That's something that I value a lot in video games.
Yeah.
It's why certain games that I recognize were good this year are not on my list, because there was too much wasted space in them. And I just couldn't care about that. Velocity 2X knows exactly what it wants to do. It gets in, it gets out, it does that. It's hard to explain what kind of game it is. I did talk about it on the podcast, and actually the game's developers tweeted me saying thanks. They were really happy. Anyway, that was one of the weirder things that happened to me this year on Twitter.
They're probably going to tweet at you. It's like, what's not your number one game of the year, asshole?
Yeah.
Fuck you.
The toxic side of the internet.
Yeah.
No, but it's so beautifully, intricately, intelligently designed, and it offered this constant, incredible rush from start to finish. And just, it has these beautiful, colorful graphics and some of the most kick-ass music you'll find anywhere this year. If I were ranking video game music, this would come in at number 2 for this year. I'll tell you about what the number 1 was later. But man, it's got this great, like, techno kind of retro music. It looks awesome. And it's got these kind of, it's this, like, you're flying your ship and it's kind of a top-down side view kind of thing.
Yeah, Galaga kind of, although you're actually moving up. Yeah.
You're moving up, yeah. And the levels, they start out kind of simple, and they just layer and layer and layer, and it's one of those games that by the end it's almost like when you go back and play something like Super Metroid, an older game that just has a level of design so intricate it blows your mind that anyone sat down and made this. Mm-hmm. That's what Velocity 2X is like. It is a perfect game. It does not put one toe out of line in terms of how well it does every one of its systems, how good every level is, what a rush, the pace of it. You know, it's a game that takes a couple hours to complete, but then you can go back and do all these other things. I mean, I finished it, and then I went back and just played levels over and over again, not necessarily to get the collectibles and the par times and stuff, just because I couldn't stop. It was so much fun. It was a cross-buy, cross-play title for Vita and PS4, so I went between the two of them, and that was great. Man, it's just, you know, I talked about it then. Velocity 2X blew me away. I loved it. There was definitely consideration that this could have gone at number 1 at certain times this year. I ultimately have 3 more that I do feel like were, you know, bigger experiences for me. But man, when I was playing Velocity 2X, I was in on it 100%. You know, there are some games I play while listening to podcasts, including number 3, 2, and 1 on this list, or doing something else. Velocity, no. You just play that, you soak up the music, you have fun, You blow up some aliens. You watch the kind of surprisingly touching, simple story that goes on between these two main characters and this evil empire they have to take down.
Look at the main character and it's like, what made her decide to get that haircut?
Right.
That's a weird fucking haircut.
God, I just want to go play more Velocity 2X. This was a phenomenal game. You gotta play it. So great.
Yeah, that's like one of those games that's like, because I also downloaded it when it was a PS Plus title that I've been meaning to get around to for a very long time.
Yeah. That was my number 4.
Okay, my number 3. This is like where now I'm looking at my list and I'm like, man, like this is so arbitrary where I'm putting these games at this point. My number 3, I don't know how how I've decided where to put this, but I'm just going to say number 3 is Dragon Age Inquisition, because it's I should say right now that I haven't technically finished it, but I don't think there's anything that's going to be in the rest of the game that would really change my opinion on it. Like, unless somehow the story becomes really amazing, which I don't like. You know, generally the main plot of a BioWare game is not the thing that's really great about it, and that's certainly not true about Dragon Age Inquisition. The shit about like Corypheus and like the Red Templars, whatever. I don't really care. It's almost like it's kind of bad because it's a little bit too cheesy, I think, for the setting. But the things that Dragon Age Inquisition does do really well is something that I don't think I've ever seen another game quite do. And that the thing I really appreciate about it is, like, one, the characters I really love. Like BioWare has always done really well by like creating these really interesting party members that are really fun to learn more about as you play the game. And there's only like the only character that I don't particularly like is Solus, because he's
boring as shit.
He's kind of soulless, one might say about him.
Yeah.
There's usually he's like the Kaiden Alenko. Remember in Mass Effect,
Yes.
the dude that you're like, thank God that like I get to choose him to die over Ashley, because Ashley's so much more interesting as a character. Like, there's usually one character in a BioWare game that you're like, great, Solus. Yeah, you're a really weird bald elf who has just a really strange shaped head. I don't think any like life form could have a head that looks like that.
For me, that character in this game was Cole. Is that his name? The
I like
little brat bitch?
Cole just feels like a character that like I like him, but like he's so odd that there's nothing to do with him.
He felt to me like Hope from Final Fantasy 13 pumped up to 11.
Oh, I wouldn't say that, because like Cole is just such a weird character, because he's like this like spirit demon.
Yeah, quit bitching about it. Get on with your life, Cole.
He's not bitching. Like, he barely has emotion. Like, he's just like this weird ethereal entity. Hope is this little fucking cunt. Like, they're not even similar characters. I don't understand how you could possibly compare the two.
I can do the comparison.
Like, no, seriously. Like, I just want to stop for a second.
Cole is he's this whiny little bitch who's like, if I feel their emotions, she's dying, what do I do? And then I skip through the conversation.
Like, he's practically fucking sociopathic. Like, he feels almost like he feels other people's emotions.
Can I say something?
But he just relates it to you in this really like sort of like stoic matter-of-the-fact way. Like, I don't understand how they're similar.
Right.
I don't love Cole, but he's not like Hope.
I guess I should admit at this point, I've technically only seen 2 scenes with Cole in them.
Okay, yeah.
I hated them so much, I scrubbed through all the other ones.
He's not a particularly interesting character, but I think that's just because he's so weird. Because he's not human, you know. He's this like spirit entity. Like, because I haven't finished the game. Like, I finished his sort of like specific quest line, you know, and gotten to the end of that. But like, I don't feel like it's ever fully explained how he exists, you know.
Okay.
But yeah.
Go on. What did you like about
weird
Dragon Age?
Fucking thing with Cole aside? Like, I you know, like the Iron Bull is fucking great. Cassandra, I really, really like Cassandra. Varric is fantastic. I really like Vivienne. She's really funny. Dorian is a really great character. And there's just like, and then there's also, I think, a lot of like really just kind of fun random characters that you meet along the way. That like, I grew really weirdly fond of what's her name? The lead scout Harding. Like,
I love her. She's great.
Like, you have like a handful of little conversations with her, but like every time I would go to a new area, I'm like, hey, what's up, Harding? Like, I haven't talked to you in a while.
Yeah,
I really
love
like
Harding.
her. Yeah, but like, so with Dragon Age Inquisition, it's a game that has so many flaws, which is why I find like really hard where to put on the list. It's like the main plot's not particularly interesting. I think that the start of the game is pretty bad in that it's really slow. The first big area it dumps you into, the hinterlands, is easily the most boring area in the whole game, just visually and in terms of the content. Like I feel like the hinterland, because the hinterlands like is 3 times the size of almost like any of the other maps. Like the hinterlands is huge, and it's just basically some woodlands. It doesn't have any sort of core design element, which is I think is key to most of the other areas. And then it's also very easy in the hinterlands to just sort of get caught up in like the most meaningless of side missions of like, I have this ram who's lost. Like, can you go find my ram?
So you did that mission too? Yeah.
I mean, I cleared out all the hinterlands when I was listening to a podcast.
I did
at
too.
one point. I went back to it. There's also another one that's like, can you go put like these flowers on my wife's grave? Like, go do it yourself, bitch. Like, I'm the fucking Inquisitor. I'm trying to save the goddamn world. Like, the hinterlands is a certain level of like mundane nonsense quest that like you don't see so much these days of like, no. Like, if you're going to ask me to go like clear the bandits off the main road, it's like, yeah, fair enough. Like, that's a quest. Like, I'm not going to go do your grocery shopping, asshole. But like, so like the hinterlands is really slow, and I think in general the pace of the game I don't love up until you get like the sort of the big main turning point in the story culminates in you, like the first one culminates in you arriving at this castle called Skyhold. And again the game opens up, and once that happens, that's when I started really, really liking the game, because one, like the combat's really dull, but it becomes a lot more interesting once you level up, and particularly once you get a specialization. I think like the tactics that you can apply in combat expand a little bit. Like the combat never becomes great. It's never as good as it was in the original Dragon Age in terms of like the tactics of it. But like it becomes engaging enough that like I'm not bored with it once you get to a certain level. And then also like Skyhold acts as a nice way to sort of like center your character in terms of like, okay, like I have all my companions here. There's like random little stuff I can do to sort of like, you know, decorate the place, and I like can like hire like this enchanter dwarf to come hang out and enchant things for me. So like once you kind of like start that and you feel like I'm building the Inquisition, and like that's the core of the game to me, is that's like I am the Inquisitor. I am like it's creating this new force in the world of Thedas. I'm like assembling all these allies. I'm trying to like solve this bullshit with the fucking Fade and the rifts and nonsense. And like that's what I'm doing. And it's kind of like the same thing they tried to do with Mass Effect 3. But I think here it works a little bit better in that there's not the same sense of urgency that Mass Effect 3 had, and that it's like everything I'm doing is building up this core goal I have, that I'm like creating this organization that eventually I want to go take down Corypheus. But like, you know, there's no sort of like the main problem with Mass Effect 3 in terms of that stuff was like the fucking Reapers are right here, and doing some random nonsense feels a little bit kind of like the grocery shopping problem. So like once I feel like you get to Skyhold, the game opens up, and then the main thing that like the reason why it's so high on this list is because the thing that Dragon Age Inquisition does well, the thing I've never seen anywhere else, is that you load into these big open world areas that are not like ridiculously open world, but like, you know, these big maps. And each one to me feels incredibly well designed. They feel like, you know, they're really beautiful, they're really unique, each one, and then they all have this sort of like core thing that they're all designed around. So it's like whenever I go to a new area, I don't feel like, okay, now I basically have to do the same thing I did on the Hinterlands here. Instead it's like, okay, now when I go to like the coast, or when I go to Crestwood, you know, Crestwood has this massive rift that has opened up in the middle of this giant lake. So it's like, okay, I need to go find the village of Crestwood and like make sure everyone's okay there. It's like, now I want to go take care of this giant rift. And once I go to, like, you go through like this whole fucking like dungeon and shit, you close the rift, like all of a sudden Crestwood becomes this really beautiful place, whereas before, like, the dead were rising from the graves and rain was coming down. And there's just a bunch of areas like that. Like there's like in Prix du Lion is this area where like you're fighting back the Red Templars and pushing them back until you take over this big fortress. You know, there's something about the way the areas are designed when you compare it to like a different kind of game, but I think you can still make the comparison, like Skyrim. Whereas like Skyrim is this huge, massive open world, but it feels like it never has a focal point. It's like Skyrim really asks you as the player to sort of like try to find something to anchor you down to something that you want to do. Whereas I feel like Dragon Age Inquisition, it strikes this really interesting and unique balance in its world design of having these like big open areas, but ones that are just small enough that they can really focus around like one or two things. It's like, okay, in this area, like I have this long quest chain that's mainly revolving around I want to get this like dragon to show up, and then I have this other main quest line that's kind of revolving around all these lyrium traders that are just kind of out in the wild that I keep on encountering. So I feel like all the areas have this really strong sense of identity that is missing from other games vaguely of this type. And so like Dragon Age Inquisition is a game that I find so hard to sort of submit my feelings on because it does some things so poorly, but what it does well, I really, really enjoy and have never quite seen before, you know?
It's really interesting, and I almost would like in an upcoming week maybe to do a fuller podcast on this game.
Yeah, once I've finished it and stuff.
Yeah, me too, because, well, I don't know if I'll ever finish it, but I should say, I have played 50 hours of Dragon Age Inquisition. Yeah. It was on this list right up until about 2 days ago, and I just did not have the enthusiasm for it that I had for the 10 titles that ultimately made the cut, and I guess that's always, having made lists like this for 10 years in various mediums, that's kind of always my criteria, is that enthusiasm factor. Mm-hmm. I think, as you say, Dragon Age Inquisition does some things just spectacularly well. I like that feeling of being the Inquisitor, too. I think it does that great. In fact, my favorite things to do in the game were when you get to sit in judgment of people on the throne.
That's such a cool mechanic, yeah.
I love executing people.
I always tried to find the most practical solution.
The most practical solution.
Yeah, it would fuck over the other person, but I would put them to use in some way.
Nice.
It's just like, yeah, like this thing you hate, like I'm going to make you do it because you're good at doing it, and I'm going to make you do it for me, asshole. I'm going to benefit from your suffering, not just kill you. That's too nice.
Yeah, those moments were great. It's got one of my favorite character creators in a game ever. I love how my dude looked and sounded and everything, and that was really awesome, and I thought made the game personal in a very unique way. I mean, it's not often you get to play as a giant demon dude. It's the Canary, by the way, but he looks like a giant demon dude.
And anyway. I think I said this on an earlier podcast. In Dragon Age Origins, the original game, the Canary did not have horns. They just looked like big guys.
Oh, weird.
And then I think it was in Dragon Age 2, because I looked it up. In Dragon Age 2, they were like, yeah, fuck it. Now they have giant horns and shit.
So it's like the Klingons.
Yeah,
with
it's
their
exactly like
foreheads?
the Klingons. Okay. It's like they just used to be kind of weird looking guys, and now like they're like totally alien with like weird forehead ridges.
Nice.
Yeah, it's the same
well, anyway, yeah. So I think all of that's great. I love a lot of the characters. I think a lot of them feel stock and never got all that fleshed out to me, but there are ones that I really like. I find the main storyline interesting. I don't think it's great. I also would never call it bad or anything, and I think
there's something about like the Corypheus thing that feels like this maybe comes from like me having experience with the world. It feels like Dragon Age fan fiction at some point of like, this is so ridiculous. Like this dude is this is nonsense.
Well, and I should say I don't like the Corypheus stuff. It just feels like a random big bad out in the world that I don't know anything about. He has no personality, and I think there are some.
It's the Didact.
Yeah. There are some story high points, absolutely. I think the part where you enter the Fade at one point, that's a great stretch of game.
Infamously, in the original Dragon Age Origins, you also enter the Fade in like very different circumstances, and in that game, that's like the worst part by far.
Oh,
they made the Fade part way better. Like the Fade part's really cool now.
No, I think there's some standout story elements, and whenever I would play them, it actually sapped my enthusiasm for Dragon Age because I realized how, to me, almost everything around them is just fluff. At a certain point, and again, I played more of this game than I did many of the games on this actual top 10 list, 50 hours or more now, and it's like, it just felt like total busy work to me at a certain point. I agree that those areas definitely do have those interesting through lines to them, and part of it is the way I played the game. And this is hard to explain, but, I have ways I play RPGs, and I am, pathologically averse to having quest lines with things not finished in them, like my quest log, and I would have to go to every area and just clear it out, and at a certain point, I hated myself. I was miserable playing the game. I played most of Dragon Age Inquisition while listening to something else, and it just became this thing I was, deadening myself with all day, and I burned out harder on Dragon Age Inquisition than I really ever have on a game, where I tried playing it the other day, and I can't touch it. I am, allergic to it at this moment, because I just played too much of it without touching enough story or character stuff. Mm-hmm. And I just feel it's really overstuffed, because I would go back to Skyhold or something, and just doing the thing that I would do, like in Mass Effect back in the day, of talk to my characters before I go out again, that could take an hour and a half. Just to get through all the stuff I need to just do in Skyhold, and dealing with the war table, and all the little things I have to do. And it would be fun, but it's like, man, I could play whole fucking indie games in this stretch of time. I could watch movies in this stretch of time, and I've not, if there was a percentage completion meter, I wouldn't have moved it a blip in what I've done. And I guess all of that just compounded at a certain... And because I have not played other Dragon Age games, there was no intrinsic meaning to any of this when I went in. It was all on the strength of what this game does. And the mythology was not enough to grip me. It all felt... There's some interesting stuff, but also it's like... For the first 20 hours or so, I probably read most of what I got in terms of codex entries.
Yeah.
What do they call it? Is it the codex?
Yeah, it's a codex.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
So I would read most of that, and then at a certain point you're getting so many of them, I would never get through an area if I sat down and read things.
Yeah, no, I did not read the more textbooky codex entries. The only ones I read was if I found a letter lying on the body, I would read that. But I wouldn't read the history of the first blight. Fuck you. I know the details of the world.
It's a game that's so absurdly big to me and it just felt like I was never making a dent with it. It almost feels like the opposite of the Destiny problem, where this game has too much content, and that felt deadening in a different way to me. There was just so little... To me, there's so much lack of focus going on in this game that I never feel like it hones in on what it does particularly well, in part because I feel like a lot of the basic systems aren't that good. The fighting is just boring to me. There's nothing interesting about the combat. I think there's some scenarios that can be very interesting, and I like it visually and whatnot, and I think it controls well, but it's not all that fun to play, I don't think. There's some good music. It looks beautiful. I like all the interactions with your party. Ultimately, it was a weird scenario where the breaking point for me with Dragon Age was when I hit my favorite scene in the game. And it was... So I was one of those things where I'm going around Skyhold after something happened, and I'm talking to all my characters. And my favorite character in this game was Sarah. And I know some people would probably disagree with me on that. She just felt like a character I maybe hadn't seen before, and I found her really interesting, and I kept talking to her. And there's this great scene at one point if you befriend her far enough where she is out on a roof and takes you with her, and she talks about baking cookies, and it becomes this metaphor for her character and what she's going through. And that was a level of writing I felt like I was, and a level of depth to it in all levels of that character and what was going on in that point in the game for me that I just wasn't seeing anywhere else. And it kind of was like, all right, that was a high point. I need to step away for a little bit because I'm not feeling that. That was the first time in probably 30 hours of gameplay I legitimately felt something strong playing Dragon Age. And then it was like, I just don't have the energy to do more of this right now. I do want to go back to it at some point and finish the game. I'll probably just rush through the main quest line and finish it to try to figure out where the story goes. Maybe if I'd finished the whole thing, my opinion would be different, but...
Yeah, because for me, because the thing I find is because, I recognize where a lot of your problems are, and I think I've kind of, would have felt the same way if I played it a little bit differently, but I've been playing Dragon Age for, 2 months, I've been... And I've racked in, I think, 75 hours. I've played a shit fucking ton of that game. And, the thing that I actually like about it is that I think if you choose to play it, over a protracted period of time and not, marathon it a lot, in a couple of days or something.
And I should say I did all this in, 2 weeks. So I was marathoning it hard.
Yeah, I feel like there's something about the game that the way it's designed that you have, like I said, those open world areas that are big, but they're not ridiculously big. They're very manageable. And so that's something that I feel like the game divides itself into these very easy to digest chunks of okay, this week I'm working my way through Impri de Leon or whatever, and I'm mostly focusing on doing the quests in that area and sort of exploring that area, fighting the dragon and stuff like that. And once I'm done with that, I can move on and go to the Emerald Graves or something. And I feel like I really like that the way the game is designed, even though I've never seen a game designed that way. And I think part of the problem is that the way the game presents itself up front, particularly with the hinterlands and stuff, is I think the game invites you to try to marathon it, and then it burns you for that, which I think is mostly what you experience, where it's it's not offering a kind of experience like a Mass Effect or something where it's because Mass Effect games are long, but they're only 20 to 25 hours. They're not crazy long. And so a lot of the character stuff in Mass Effect compared to Dragon Age is really condensed. And so with Dragon Age Inquisition, one of the things that I think you need to... For me, the thing I'm mainly playing the game for is the sense of discovery in traveling around these big open areas and finding the next thing around the corner, and finding what crazy fucking dragon battle is going to happen over there, or what might be in this cave. because there's also like the game has a much bigger focus on loot than most BioWare RPGs have, and I find that's something that like it's kind of.
I hate that part of the game. I
like it because I feel like there's a lot of really like I feel like the art design is really good, and so I like when I get like a new giant sword. It's like, oh, this thing like looks fucking crazy.
Okay.
Like there's an element of that to the game that's like if it didn't have that, I think I would have burned out of the game really hard if it didn't have like loot that you could get to sort of like be like, okay, I feel like my character.
Here's a question
visually. Yeah.
What the fuck do you use gold for in this game? Is it just you put it on the
I mean,
wall?
there's
What is it there for?
There's like several. I mean, you can buy some legendary weapons from certain places. If you're engaging with the crafting system, most of that stuff, like if you want to craft something specific, you'd have to buy the plans for in Orlais.
It's too much. It's just like
the game has a huge number of systems. It doesn't explain most of the systems particularly well. Stuff like the crafting and like the herb stuff, it does not do anywhere near enough that it needs to do to explain that. And most of it's completely perfunctory unless you're playing on the hardest difficulty. You know?
Yeah.
Like you don't need to bother with like crafting every different kind of health potion and stuff like that. And it's a thing that's like. If you can just ignore that part of the like, if you just like ignored the potion table completely, it would not affect your playthrough if you're not playing on the hardest difficulty, you know.
Yeah.
And something that's like if you compartmentalize the game mentally, I think it's a lot more approachable. But it is something that I agree with you. Like it has this ridiculous bulk to it that is a problem.
And it's just weird because I want to say I do like Dragon Age Inquisition a lot. I think I had a lot of fun with it. It does all these amazing things, and I kept playing for 50 hours for a reason. It wasn't just random. But, you know, I felt overwhelmed almost from the beginning with the amount of stuff in there. I don't think I'm good at compartmentalizing like that in games. It's just not the way I'm wired. And by the end, I never felt any less overwhelmed. I never felt like I was making a dent in things. I never felt like I was making progress. And like with most RPGs, I like that feeling of being overwhelmed and then finding a way through it. I never found a way through that, I guess is the best way I could say it. And I mean, honestly, it sent me back to I've been playing Game Boy Advance games for the last 3 weeks for the simplicity of it. It's like I needed to go back to something simpler and more tight and direct. But it's like it is a personality thing. Like I don't disagree with a single thing you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, I would like to say like something else about Dragon Age that for me, since I played and really loved Dragon Age Origins, I do think it's kind of a split thing where Inquisition, like if this is the first Dragon Age game you've played, like I don't know how you approach it because like it just starts, you know, like it literally just like. I mean, literally, you hit the fucking options button, and the first thing that happens is a giant magic explosion happens, and the fucking Pope is killed, basically. And so it's like, if you don't know anything about the world and the state of the world, like with like the mages and the Templars and the Chantry, or any of like all those factions and like what the elves are and what the dwarves are, like what Darkspawn are, what the Grey Wardens are, what a Blight is, what an Archdemon is. If you don't know any of that shit, like I have no idea how you played this game.
It
doesn't explain any of the story stuff.
And to be honest, that part was not a problem at all.
Really?
I got it fine. It was. I think like that's just one thing I want to praise it for is the world and the culture is fleshed out enough that I just felt immersed in it, and I it's like going to a new country and just learning a language through immersion. I just got it after a certain point. You know, I didn't know what the Chantry was when they said it at first. I got it. You know, I realized what it was. I know what the and I learned a little bit of it because I did the Dragon Age Keep thing.
Right. Yeah.
But that doesn't tell you all that much. It just
And then, actually, that's another thing about the game that like if you do the Dragon Age Keep, it sort of is like a way to do the save transfer more or less from Mass Effect, and it's something that like I think they actually do a really good job of that, like almost better than Mass Effect in some ways, in terms of like in particular there's one character where like when I play Dragon Age Origins there is a really specific really weird fucking ending you can get where I guess like the short of it is that you can romance this character Morgan, who's a character that comes in later in Dragon Age Inquisition. And she's sort of like this witch character. And you can romance her. And there's like something super specific where, like, if you are a male a male main character and you romance Morgan, there is an option you have where basically one of the things how like the mechanics of the universe works is when you have a blight, which is basically when these sort of like demonish creatures called Darkspawn are sort of like spilling out onto the surface world and are slaughtering people because they found like a dragon that they call an archdemon. And so this is like the 5th time that happens. That's Dragon Age Origins. And so the whole Dragon Age Origins is trying to stop the Fifth Blight. So the final part of the game is you're going to go kill the Archdemon. But you find out that when you kill an Archdemon, the Grey Warden who kills the Archdemon, because of all this stuff with like what Grey Wardens are with Darkspawn blood, the Grey Warden who kills the Archdemon dies. But there's a way around that where if you impregnate Morgan, the soul of the Archdemon, instead of going into the Grey Warden that kills it and destroying the Grey Warden, instead goes into her unborn child, and so that child lives in like some like weird other state. Like that super specific, really weird fucking ending that I picked is totally followed up on in Dragon Age Inquisition. Not in a way that's like it's part of the main plot, but like it is fully addressed in like multiple conversations you can have with Morgan when her character comes on in like super specific detail. And it never feels like a thing that is like, oh, they just kind of wrote around this. It feels like they probably recorded ludicrous amounts of dialogue for like particularly the returning characters from Origins to accommodate all the fucking shit you could do, because that was one of the great things about the original Dragon Age, is like you could kind of like with Inquisition, but unlike Dragon Age 2, you could make a character of like you could make a dwarf male or female, you could make like an elf male or female, you could make a mage, which has huge implications for that universe, or you could be a human, and it's like you could do all this stuff, you can have all these different backgrounds, change the world in all these different ways, and super specific configurations and stuff, and they account for that stuff so well if you go through the Dragon Age Keep. But like, there's just random shit like the Enchantress that you hire is a minor side character from Dragon Age Origins, but I imagine she only shows up or like is that specific character if you do the mission in Dragon Age Origins where you send her off to the College of Mages to train to be an Enchantress. So it's like there's like all this really specific shit like that. I was actually really impressed by. Holy shit, like, all these choices are followed up on in some interesting way.
Yeah. So we have to move on,
right?
Because we're running long here. But anything else to say just in conclusion about Dragon Age Inquisition?
It's a weird, flawed game that I really like.
Okay. And, yeah, I hope I didn't take too much enthusiasm out of that. But, yeah, definitely. I hope we can talk about it again sometime. So, next would be my number 3, right?
Yeah.
My number 3 is Persona Q, Shadow of the Labyrinth. Good reason to own a 3DS. There were a number of them this year. As there are every year recently. But Persona Q, as I said, actually in our last episode, as pathetic as that is,
right?
This is a game that should not be as good as it is. It's Persona fan fiction. I mean, or fan service. You know, it's let's take the Persona 3 cast and the Persona 4 cast and put them together in a game that takes the Persona mechanics and the Etrian Odyssey mechanics and puts them together. Yeah. Ultimate fan service orgy. That's basically what it is. And somehow it is this wonderfully written, wonderfully funny, kind of beautifully nuanced character study on all these characters that has deep implications for where all of these characters are at the different points in the respective stories they are coming from.
Yeah,
and
how they time travel stuff in the Persona 3 cast.
Yep. And how they are relating to each other specifically and what's going on in their lives. And you will have these scenes that can go on for an hour or more where you're just following one character as they do something and you help them do something. Like you help Naoto solve a mystery. And it's really funny, but it also has some pretty deep things to say about all the characters involved. Mm-hmm. Or you will help Marie just go have tea time with her friends. And it is as good or better than any Marie scene in Persona 4 Golden, which is a ridiculously high bar to match. Persona Q is really, in most respects, on par with the games it is a spin-off of. In fact, I would say in its main mechanics as a dungeon crawler and a RPG turn-based fighter, it is probably superior. It is more fun to play on that basic level. Mm-hmm. And while it doesn't have social links and that other side to the game, when you come out of the labyrinth, there's all sorts of fun things to do within the character stuff that's going on and the very deep systems that are going on with the personas and your equipment. Mm-hmm. But it's never too much. In fact, it was one of these things that made me realize how I was kind of underwhelmed with Dragon Age is I took a couple days off Dragon Age and played a little Persona Q. I hadn't played Persona Q in about a month. I went back to it, and I got it immediately. I hadn't forgotten a thing. It just snapped because that game is so mechanically tight. Everything is integrated so well. It all just works perfectly. And if I took 10 hours off of Dragon Age, I would forget half of what's in that game because so little of it meshes to me. Mm-hmm. And it just... all of that while telling this really the story that is just so much better than it needs to be for what the game actually is. I have not finished Persona Q yet. I think that's okay. Normally I'm uncomfortable with that, with this kind of list, but it's like a 60-hour game. I've played about 25. I've gotten through 2 of the 4 main dungeons, and I know enough. This is great. Maybe it would be higher if I'd actually finished it, but I'm also kind of trying to work against maybe that Persona bias.
Yeah.
Because on some level, this is the game I got the most enjoyment out of this year because I love those Persona characters so much. But yeah, I mean, it is really, really good. I was kind of doubtful this crossover thing could work this well. I was doubtful a Persona game on the 3DS might work just because of maybe the limitations of that system graphically. No, it is one of the best looking games on that system. Certainly one of the best sounding. Holy shit, this soundtrack is fantastic. Shoji Meguro, as always, just working his magic with that. Man, it's a blast. I've never had more fun doing basic dungeon crawling in a video game. It's amazing when you can see a mechanic like that reinvented. And I think even if you're a big Etrian Odyssey fan, which I haven't really played that series before, but from what I can tell, this builds on that so much because it feels like a full-fledged Persona game in a lot of ways. You have your Personas, you have your Persona fusions. I spent an hour in the Velvet Room earlier today.
Yeah.
Because
Persona.
My Personas were evolved and I had to get rid of them and get new ones in. That's, and it took a while. I had to go sell stuff for money for the compendium,
Yeah.
Persona. But yeah, and it is, I've laughed so hard at this game. It just gets those characters so well. And as we said with Persona 4 Arena, Persona 4 the Ultimax Ultra Suplex Hold.
Yes.
There we go. We're being spoiled with these Persona spin-offs.
Yeah.
It's almost like we don't even need Persona 5. These are all so good. But I can't wait for Persona 5 because then we get Persona 5 spin-offs.
Yeah. Now we have a whole new set of characters and then we just mix everything together.
No. My 3DS is now permanently housed in the Persona Q case I got with the game, and I am proud of it. Persona Q is wonderful. Don't play it if you're not a fan of this series, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm not... Putting it at number 3 is not me just being a fanboy. It really is a phenomenal game. Absolutely.
Cool. Now all we need is Persona 4 Dancing All Night and the trifecta of the fighting games, the Etrian Odyssey games, and the rhythm game spin-off magic.
Look for that on our top 10 lists next year.
And then they just have to make another game that's all three of those games combined somehow.
Indeed. So that's my number 3 game of the year. All right, we're getting to the end. Sean, your number 2.
My number 2 is Destiny.
What?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
That Destiny is easily the hardest game for me. It was the hardest game for me to place on this list. Originally, it was at number 10. Then it was at number 6. Then it was at number 8. And I was like, fuck it, now it's just number 2. Because... Destiny is a game that, it's so flawed in just a ridiculous number of ways that we've talked about at length on this podcast before. But, there's just something about, one, the world and, the graphics and the presentation, I think is so great. It's just, I just love being, in the tower and, seeing all the Guardians wandering around and just kind of, walking around and looking at the Traveler off in the distance and seeing the reflections in the puddles and stuff like that. And the same with all the areas, going to the moon or the Earth or Venus or Mars. I think all those areas are really interesting and it's fun to just be in the game. But by far the main thing about Destiny that's so good is that it's the best playing game I've played all year. Easily it's the best, just in terms of the combat mechanics, the shooting, and the encounter design. It's easily, I think, the best playing game I've played this year. It's just everything around that combat is lacking either in some minor ways or some really significant ways in terms of the story doesn't exist and it's it puts the player in this really awkward position of where you keep expecting a story to pop up at some point and then just never does and you're like, I guess okay, that's just what this game is. And then it never explains its end game particularly well. It asks so much of the player in terms of and this is some of this has been alleviated a little bit, but none of it has been fixed. That asks so much of go to the moon and pick up helium filaments. It's oh fuck you. Now I have to look up a map on the internet for where the helium filament placements are and just run around in a circle for 15 minutes and pick up a whole bunch of them to upgrade my weapon and all that stuff. There's so much bullshit. It's so much of it's so awful, but it just plays so well, and some of the things that it does no other game does. Just the very unique, specific balance it has between it being a first-person shooter and a loot-based RPG. If you compare it to something like Borderlands, where it's a relatively similar concept, it's Borderlands is a much more sort of fleshed-out game in terms of there's a lot of content, and all the content, it doesn't feel polished, but it feels there's not anything that I look at in a Borderlands game, because I've only really played Borderlands 2. There's nothing I look at in Borderlands 2 and is like, that's just complete fucking shit. Other than maybe the writing sometimes. But, yeah, whatever. The game design is there's no, area in the map or, encounter or, bosses other than Borderlands 2. I'm like, this is just, the stupidest idea. And there are several things in Destiny that I look at, I'm like, why the fuck is this like this? Who designed... why the fuck are the Grimoire cards accessed on the internet through the, website or the companion app? That's complete fucking lunacy. So it's Destiny has that stuff, but just playing the game, if you compare, if you just gave me the controller and I did a fight in Destiny and a fight in Borderlands, or even a fight in, Call of Duty, Destiny, beats all of those down, without a contest. It's not even fair how well Destiny controls and plays, and especially when you add a lot of the abilities on top of it. That
throwing knife.
Yeah, the throwing knife. And, just the tactile feel of that, and, the double jump and shit. It's it just feels so fucking good to play. And that's something that, at the end of the day, it's a video game. And so when I think about playing Destiny, it's there's this, something in the back of my head where it's all that bullshit. But then there's another part of me that's just fuck it, man. Just blowing the head off of a fallen dreg is so fucking satisfying. But at no point in that game does it feel like Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, where it's the game's just handing you head explosions. It's you have to work for it. There's a skill to that game, especially if you're playing the missions on the harder difficulty. It's it's so much fun, but it's challenging and rewarding. And there's no game more in the world that I want to see a sequel to, because I want Destiny to have the chance to fix its flaws, because if it's able to do that, if Destiny did not have some of those really stupid mistakes, it would easily be the number one game of the year in a way that none of the other games on this list would even be able to touch it,
Absolutely. It's a weird game to talk about.
Yeah, fucking Destiny, man.
Yeah.
Fucking Destiny.
So my number 2 game of the year, and I have to commit to something now. I've been thinking these entire last 2 hours about flipping my number 2 and my number 1, but I'm going to stick with it. My number 2 game of 2014 is Bravely Default for the Nintendo 3DS, which I have talked about at least 3 times on this show. So let me give you the short version.
Okay.
Anything you ever wanted in a JRPG, it's in Bravely Default.
Social links.
They're not social links, but I mean a tradition. Sorry, I should define this.
The characters of Persona 3 or the characters in Persona 4.
Okay.
A dog that can summon a much bigger dog that breathes fire. A robot.
Okay.
Are any of those things...
No.
No, okay.
Anyway, any of the basic just mechanical things, I feel
crystals?
like you might
want...
crystals? There are lots of crystals.
Okay. Great, I'm on board.
So many crystals. If you want, all the basic stuff. It's got a just wonderfully realized landscape, beautiful graphics, great art design, 4 really vivid characters, much more so than in maybe, it kind of mimics, I think, those Final Fantasy, 4, 5, 6 era games.
Yeah.
But it's got better characters than those do at the heart of them. I don't know if the story is better overall, but it does have a really fun story that moves at a good clip for most of the game. It's got all those little nice amenities, the random encounter slider. And just the way it's got... it's been so long since I've played this game that I forget some of the things I would have mentioned back in the day. But, just the way, for instance, if you want to grind, you can... And you don't have to, I want to say that. Yeah. I don't think you have to. You can adjust the difficulty, you can do lots of things. But if you want to grind and get your levels up, you can get these chains of battles. You can use your auto battle. It's really all customizable to how you want to play that game. All those little amenities that you might have ever wanted in a JRPG and just thought they're never going to show up, it's all in there. And more than anything, it's just really fun, and it's really tight mechanically. It is a great evolution of where Final Fantasy kind of left off after 6. I think if JRPGs kept evolving and didn't go off in the weird direction they went off in with Final Fantasy 7 and some of that stuff, where I feel like they kept being mired in certain things while the evolutions that did take place were things that don't interest me all that much. Bravely Default feels like where we'd be at 20 years later. And, it's just, like I said, really good storytelling, great characters that I loved being with. I loved inhabiting this world. The battles are so much fun. It is one of the best JRPG battle systems I've ever seen. The Brave versus Default mechanic that gives the game its title is a really interesting one. Again, talking about those amenities. If you want to just chain up 4 moves in a row, go ahead and do it. And you know what? There's actually strategy to it. It doesn't just break the game. That's amazing to me, that you can do all these things. And, it's got all these elemental elements to it, too. It's the battle system, kind of like a Persona or a Pokemon or something. But there's a lot of depth to it all the time. The movement around the map is really interesting. It has easily one of the very best video game soundtracks I've ever heard. I love listening to it. It is right up there with your Personas and your Halos and some of my just favorite video game soundtracks that I'm always going to go back to. Definitely my favorite soundtrack of this year. I was talking about earlier. Velocity 2X would be number 2. This would be number 1 here. It is just such a beautiful score that honestly elevates the game for me a lot. I was listening to tracks from it earlier today to prepare to talk about it, and I was almost like just on pure emotion alone. Like, this has to go up to number 1, doesn't it? And I just think Bravely Default just does some things so well, and it just scratches that itch that I think me and a lot of other people probably want from this kind of JRPG, where I love something like Persona. I love it to death. My favorite games of all time. But that doesn't necessarily do the same thing for me that maybe a classic Final Fantasy does. Yeah, definitely. And playing a classic Final Fantasy today is not the same thing as having a new game. Mm-hmm. And that's not to put those games down. They're great. They stand the test of time. They're influential. They're wonderful. You should play them. But it's nice to have an evolution of that. Bravely Default is a Final Fantasy game in everything but name. And yet it's also carved its own path for itself. And you talk about sequels you're excited for. Man, Bravely Second, the next one, I'm really psyched to see what they do with that. Because if they can fix this game's one major flaw, which is that the story goes completely batshit off the rails at a certain point, that could be a masterpiece. Bravely Default, it wouldn't be number 1 probably if it didn't have that ending. And if you've heard about Bravely Default, you know about the ending. It's weird. As I was explaining to you the other day, we were talking about this. I think the story is actually really interesting for what happens near the end game, up until a point, and then it has just some weird flaws. They were going for something I think really interesting and ambitious, and I'll always give points for ambition. That's great. It's kind of like Destiny or something. Mm-hmm. Like, didn't fulfill it, but ambition is good. They definitely did not fulfill their ambition for that ending, but man, I find it really interesting, and I still enjoyed the game and played it through to completion, and loved it. Bravely Default, I've said my piece on it before, we'll say it again. One of those games that's just reason enough on its own to own the 3DS, and I hope that people keep discovering it, because it's a great game. And we talk about polish, I mean, this is a game that feels so polished, in part because this totally counts as a 2014 game, because its English language release was this year. Definitely. But it is the 3rd version of the game, because there was the version in Japan, they did a whole kind of remake, rejiggering of it for the 3DS again, and then they ported that version over to America with more improvements, so it's been improved upon multiple times, and now we have this version that is just so great, and so... That's what the last thing I would want to say about it, is that while it is a Final Fantasy game in a lot of ways, it also feels unique. Its atmosphere and the tone it creates just feels a little unlike any game I've ever played, and I love that. I love seeing that. It's one of those games that reached really high for me this year. So number 2, definitely Bravely Default.
Nice.
So for our number 1, why don't you go ahead and recap your list?
Okay.
Right up until we get our number 1.
My list was honorable mentions of both Hearthstone and Diablo 3 The Ultimate Evil Edition, with number 10 being Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. Number 9, Persona 4 The Ultimax Ultra Suplex Hold. Number 8, Luftrausers. Number 7, Infamous Second Son. Number 6, Wolfenstein The New Order. Number 5, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Number 4, The Last of Us Left Behind. There's a lot of subtitle games in mine.
Yes.
Number 3, Dragon Age Inquisition. Number 2, Destiny. And my number 1 game of the year is Far Cry 4. Holy fucking shit. Far Cry 4 is fucking awesome. Like, oh my fucking god. That fucking game. I don't even know if I need to say anything more other than it is a game in which you can take C4, strap it onto an elephant, ride that elephant into a camp of assholes, and then blow up the elephant and all the assholes in that camp, and then you take over that camp. And that's a game you can do that in. It is also a game where you can get into a helicopter, fly super fucking high up, jump out of the helicopter, activate a wingsuit, glide down, and land on someone while stabbing them in the throat, and then taking that guy and pulling a pin out of his grenade and kicking him towards two of his nearest buddies and watching them blow up because of that grenade. It is also a game in which you can walk into a different outpost of assholes, shoot open a cage that has a tiger in it, watch that tiger start eating the assholes, and then figure, like, what's worse than getting eaten by a tiger? I know, getting eaten by a tiger that's on fire, and spray the tiger with a flamethrower, so the tiger's on fire, eating people, catching them on fire, then they are running into, like, huts and shit, catching those huts on fire, catching more people on fire, that are then running out of that hut into the grass, catching the grass on fire, and then killing everything that's in the whole area because it all burned to death, just because you sprayed a little bit of a flamethrower onto someone. It is also a game in which you can take a jet ski, ride that jet ski, hit a rock with that jet ski, go flying off the rock with that jet ski onto the land, hit a rhino in the face with that jet ski, and kill the rhino, get out, skin the rhino, and then make a bigger wallet with the skin of that rhino. It is also a game in which you can just buy a fucking Gatling gun that is like something that would be mounted on a jet, and just walk around and spray this gun that shoots rounds at like 1,000,000 rounds per second, where it's like 3 of the shots would basically kill someone, and just watching everything die, and you don't even need to fucking aim. It is also a game in which you can just be driving down the road, you can pull out the fucking, like, 2 grenade launcher from Terminator 2, shoot it out the window of your car, blowing out the window of your car, and watching the grenade, because it makes it, like, boom sound, to see it sail, hit a convoy truck that you're going for, and just watch that convoy truck explode. It is also a game in which you can just take a car and you're just driving in the Himalayas and you're like, I could keep on going on the road, but the shortest path between 2 points is just a straight line. So you just jump off the edge, like drive off the edge of the cliff, and then jump out and activate your wingsuit and glide your way to the mission. It's a game in which you can do all those things and so many more. And then on top of that, the story's actually really good. I think that's all I need to say for Far Cry 4.
The big hole this year for me in gaming is I have not gotten to Far Cry 4 yet. That saddens me. All I want to do after hearing you talk about it is play it and do all of those wonderful things.
Yeah, like the only thing bad thing I can say about Far Cry 4 is that it is very similar to Far Cry 3, which is one of my favorite games in the last few years, but it's just different enough that it never feels like you're just playing the same game. Like all the improvements they make in terms of the storytelling, in terms of like the expanded ability list with like the wingsuit and that you unlock much earlier, and the grappling hook and the mobility stuff you get, changes the game enough, and I think the map and the missions are much better and more well designed, that it's like Far Cry 3 if Far Cry 3 didn't disappoint you at the end of it,
Right.
So yeah, Far Cry 4, it's a hell of a fucking game.
Nice. So game of the year. Awesome. I cannot wait to play it. So I'll go ahead and recap my list now. My number 10 was Entwined. Number 9, Mario Kart 8. Number 8, Captain Toad, Treasure Tracker. Number 7, Infamous Second Son. Number 6, Destiny. Number 5, Titanfall. Number 4, Velocity 2X. Number 3, Persona Q, Shadow of the Labyrinth. Number 2, Bravely Default. And my number 1 game of 2014 is Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and Wii U. Technically 2 games. I think that's okay on this one.
I will let it slide.
Okay. Because, I think this is one of the things that's impressive about these games. They are not just the same game. There's a big content difference between the two of them that makes it feel worthwhile to play both of them for a great amount of time. They are obviously 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And going into this year, I was looking forward to this. I was definitely interested in Smash Brothers for 3DS and Wii U. But, Brawl was a good Smash Brothers game. It was a good game. It was a fun game. It did not hold my attention for 7 years the way Super Smash Brothers Melee has held my attention for 14 years.
It was a step down from Melee,
Definitely.
which is like kind of like Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4. It's a thing where it's like if you have 2 sequels that are very similar to each other, if like the sequel is is a step down instead of a step up, it's really noticeable,
It is. And I think with Smash Brothers for Wii U and 3DS, they have finally made the game that I think many of us maybe thought would never happen, where I think they've surpassed Melee, where they took this perfect formula and built on it and made something even better. And there are so many ways I could approach this. I think a lot of what I've said about other Nintendo games on this list counts here. Just the creativity on display in all of those map designs, in all of the characters they use, and how well each character is oriented. So, this is a huge roster of characters, much bigger than Brawl. I was actually surprised to look at the count and see that this is like 12 more characters than Brawl.
Yeah.
And yet, that roster feels so tight and so perfect and so balanced because every character has a purpose, every character plays differently, every character has a personality. If you love where that character comes from, you are going to go giddy playing as them here because they feel like you plucked that character out of that game and they're here, and yet they still play by the Smash Brothers rules. That's amazing. And we've always had that with characters like, Mario and Samus and things like that. But now you get that with, Lucina from Fire Emblem, or Robin from Fire Emblem, or Villager.
Other characters from Fire Emblem.
Or other characters from Fire Emblem. But those are new. I'm saying like Villager, which is really interesting. Or even the stupid Wii Fit Trainer, which was a dumb idea that turned out to be a fun character in the game.
That's an amazing idea.
Okay, yeah.
Like, come on. Wii Fit Trainer is a brilliant idea for a character.
Indeed. So all of those things are great. I mean, the game plays... this was to me the game that just played best this year. I've always loved Smash Brothers. Smash Brothers is one of those games that got me into gaming, and playing it, this is what I want to say about the mechanics. Because you and I had a long talk about this the other day with Smash Brothers where, is it changed enough that they really changed things from Melee? And I have clocked about 70 hours total, I think, between 3DS and Wii U, these two versions of Smash Brothers. So I have a really good feel for the mechanics of this new one, and obviously I have 14 years worth of feel for the mechanics of Melee.
Yeah.
And I went back to Melee because I didn't know how different this felt. But I went back to Melee, it felt kind of slow, a little clunkier. Obviously it's not as graphically smooth and all those things, but it just wasn't as fun. It didn't have that same punch. I didn't feel as in control of the character. Just that little, less precision, I feel like, that 14 years development has gotten us. And here's what I'll say about Smash Brothers for 3DS and Wii U, which I think is a high compliment. It plays like you remember Melee playing.
Nice.
Not how Melee played. It plays how you remember it playing, and better than ever, and that's awesome. And like I said, so many ways I could sum this up. I mean, this was my number one, and I talked about maybe switching this with Bravely Default. Really, in my heart of hearts, I know and knew from the time I started playing the Wii U version, this was number one of the year for me because I just love the character roster. I love the maps. I love the atmosphere. I love the creativity. But what it comes down to, and I know this is a cheesy and cliched thing to say, and I don't say this much about movies or games, but I'm going to break it out here. This is one of those games that made me remember why I fell in love with video games. It really was that kind of primal thing for me. Because Smash Bros. Goes back so far, that was the first game I had for my first gaming console, the Nintendo 64. And that was the game that I played at other friends' houses and made me want to get a video game home console, was Super Smash Brothers. And now this was a game that I played with my little brother. And that's just that's been our main game over the years. There have been others that we've gone to, like Halo. We play Halo all the time when we're together. But Smash Bros. Is one we always fall back on. And we played I have not played more than maybe an hour of the Wii U version alone. But I've played about 25 hours just playing with Thomas on the couch, co-op or versus or whatever. All the fun things you can do. And it just kind of reminded me of what I love about gaming when it's just you're playing it just for the sake of playing the game. I just played Smash Bros. Because I love playing Smash Bros. I love how it controls. I love the depth of it. I love how fun it is while also there's something deep that you do in it that you have to master. Easy to learn, hard to master kind of thing. I love the kind of competition that goes between you and the people you play it with. I love how you learn different characters and create this kind of emotional relationship with them in Smash Bros. That you might never have in the series they come from, which is frankly astounding that can happen. I love all of that, and I love that this was a game I played this year because I wanted to play it. Not because there were achievements I needed to get, not because, I paid an absurd amount of money for it and I just felt obligated to do it. Watch Dogs. I didn't play it through just because of all these extra, extraneous things going on. I didn't suffer through different online modes that weren't functional. I didn't feel like there were parts of the game that weren't finished. All of those things that kind of played games in 2014 and sapped a lot of my enthusiasm, none of that was there. This was just playing a game for the sake of playing the game because it's that fucking good. And I can tell after all the time I've spent with it, and honestly, after I popped in that Wii U version for the first time, and immediately realized this is the definitive version of Smash Bros. With those visuals, and that music, and these controls. Holy shit, they got it right. This is a game that'll last 7 years or more. It is the definitive version of this series so far, and to me this is one of the very best series, gaming has ever had on just a basic gameplay level. easily my number one game of the year when I think about it in those terms. The things you can do in this game and the fun you can have with it and the depth there is and the stuff I still haven't done in both of these. The 3DS version is obviously inferior on a number of levels because it is a portable version of the game. But I've also logged
fucking circle pad, man.
But I've also logged so much time in it and I've had so much fun with it and I love having that on the go. And it's a beautiful game in its own right. I was playing some more earlier today to remind myself. It's one of the best looking games on the 3DS. Just, collectively, these are two of the best-looking games Nintendo has ever made. Maybe the best ever when you played on the Wii U in high definition on your big screen. It is just so great. And, I didn't know I could still be this in love with this game from my youth that I think my enthusiasm had maybe waned for over the years. So definitely number one for me this year was Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, also for 3DS. But man, if you haven't bought a Wii U yet, there's ample reason at this point, I feel like, if you're a Nintendo fan, and this would be the first game to get. Definitely.
And how ironic is it that I started but I more or less started my list with the game that has the best title of any game of the year, and you end yours with what is arguably the worst title.
The most disappointing.
Most disappointing is probably a better one. Oh, I would maybe say worse when you have for the console in your title. It's pretty fucking... That's sad that they did that. It seems like everything else was really good.
Yeah, you know what I've learned, though? That's basically the naming convention for all the other games in the series in Japan. They're all called Super Melee Smash Brothers. Melee is just in the title of them. And I think they've just called them, for the system. And now with this... And they just did something different for America each time. And I guess they just gave up and did a universal international title this time. I wanted Rough Housing... And what was the other one? Hijinks or...
Tussle?
Tussle was it, yeah. Tussle and Rough Housing. Rough Housing would be the Wii U version. Tussle would be 3DS, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. But for the next time Smash Brothers comes around in 7 years or whatever, those are still open to be
Absolutely.
used. Or they can just say fuck it. It's now we're making Super Smash Brothers 6, I guess, if you count this as two different versions.
For the Wii Z or whatever they're calling it.
For the Wii Z.
Yep.
Because that's what Nintendo will be like by then. Wheezy. Because they're old or something. I don't know.
All right, top 10 games of the year, definitely. I feel better about the year in gaming after talking about all this.
Yeah, it was something that was I retrospectively was these games aren't so good, and then I looked at the list and I was that I actually composed it and I was okay, I actually have a good 15 or 16 games on this list that all of these are good games. Not all of them are amazing, like Dark Souls 2. But then I was hey, those I can just cut out. And I had a solid 12 games. And I was well, I can very easily justify making 2 of these honorable mentions. And now I have to somehow decide where the fuck Destiny goes.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Worst game you played this year?
Worst game I played? I would say the game that most disappointing is easily Dark Souls 2. Just because Dark Souls 1 is so good and Dark Souls 2 is so disappointing. Just...
it's not a bad game, but
it's not a bad game, but it's like that, what I said, where it's if you have 2 games that are very similar to one another, when it's the other one's a step down, it's it's so noticeable that it makes you kind of resent it. Whereas if it's a step up, like Far Cry 4 to Far Cry 3, you really appreciate it. So that's kind of like Dark Souls 2. I'd maybe Watch Dogs. At some point, Watch Dogs was such a pain. I almost would say kind of like what you were talking about with Inquisition in some way. It's kind of like Watch Dogs, where you're I've played this game for 3 hours, and I feel like I've done nothing because there's so much nonsense in this giant map. And, and it's Watch Dogs is so comparatively bland.
Yeah, worst game I played this year, definitely, at least the worst game I paid for was Fantasy Life on the 3DS. Right. I know I give a lot of love to Nintendo, so let me do this. Yeah. Fantasy Life... Stupid fucking game. People have somehow put 90 hours into that. People I respect that I read. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with you. It's a glorified to-do list where you just do tap button shit mini games. What the fuck was that? I talked about it more on last month's podcast. Listen to that. But yeah, I wanted to make fun of Fantasy Life one more time because it took $40 from me.
It didn't take $40. You gave it $40. Don't put the fucking
I know.
Yeah, the onus on Fantasy Life. What about your dumbass?
That's our top 10 games 2014. Let us go ahead and move on. Okay, so Sean.
Yes.
After a long, long journey, it is time to talk about the final Hobbit movie.
Oh yeah,
the Hobbit.
It was a somewhat unexpected journey, really. Originally we just thought it was going to be 2 movies. Or like maybe like before it was ever made, you're like, man, it would be cool if they made a Hobbit movie. And they're like, we're going to make 2 Hobbit movies. You're
like, to be fair, it was announced as one movie with Guillermo del Toro.
Oh yeah,
he decided to, and
Fuck, I forgot about all that shit.
Yeah,
it was originally going to be made by. It's been a really unexpected journey.
It has.
Holy shit! I didn't even think about the whole scope of the journey.
Yep. All right, so The Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies came out in theaters last month. Very divisive reception, which I do understand.
Yeah. Definitely.
So 2 issues at play here. We want to talk about the movie itself. I think there's a couple key scenes, key characters to talk about that I want to shine some praise on, and maybe talk about some of the issues with the movie.
Yeah.
But then, larger issue at hand is the Hobbit trilogy. Now that it exists in that form, God help us, the Hobbit trilogy.
The 6-film saga that is.
Yeah. What do we make of it? Well, let's take the smaller issue first. People probably know what I think about the Battle of the Five Armies. My review's been out for a while. What did you think of The Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies?
I've kind of conflicted about it. It's something where it's like I was disappointed in it ultimately. Like I didn't think it was as good as it could have been. It's something where it's like I've always been optimistic about the Hobbit. Well, I shouldn't say always. Like at the beginning of the trilogy, I was really optimistic for these films because I really liked Unexpected Journey. Like I recognize its problems, particularly in the pacing. And the fact that it's like, there's that whole middle section with like Rivendell and stuff that's very slow and doesn't have a lot of focus. And that's an issue with that movie. But I thought like what Unexpected Journey did well, it did really well in terms of like Bilbo and Thorin and their characters and their arc. And that it felt like a complete film that like when I left the movie theater after I watched Unexpected Journey, I was like, I really liked that movie. I enjoyed it. It felt like it was, from the people who brought us the Lord of the Rings movies, but felt different and had a different tone and a different style to it. It was what I wanted, even if it wasn't perfect, and I was really excited for the next ones. And then I watched the second one, and that Desolation of Smaug, I was like, there's still good stuff here. Like, in some of the ways that, like the way they did Mirkwood and stuff, I really like. But as a standalone movie, I think Desolation of Smaug is really bad. I don't think it has a good beginning, and I don't think it has an end at all. So it's like Desolation of Smaug is an example of like when you split these movies, and it just feels like you kind of took it out because they kind of did. And there's a lot of Desolation of Smaug where I feel like the pacing problems were even worse, where you have just weird stuff like the ending with like the fight with Smaug was just weird, and especially like knowing what was to come with like how the movie actually has to, or how the series has to deal with Smaug. And then like the Toriel subplot was just really shitty, and that stuff really bummed me out. But I was always willing, or then also, like, the whole time you have all the Dol Guldur stuff with Gandalf, like, brewing, but feeling like this is, like, building up to something, but, like, it just, in isolation of this movie, is really unsatisfying. But it was, like, something where I was always hoping, like, okay, like, this can still be salvageable. Like, the second one is a little bit annoying, and the first one has its problems, but, like, if the third one really sticks it as a piece, I think they could work. But I don't think that this movie does that. Not completely, at least. I think there's some things that it does still really well. I think Bilbo and Thorin, I have some quibbles about how they handle Thorin, but overall, I really like how those two characters sort of complete their arc in this movie. I think the action in this movie is really, really well done. It's probably, out of the 3 of these, it's the best action. It doesn't have sort of, I think, some of the tonal inconsistency problems that the action did in the first one. And so, like, some of that stuff, like, I do really like and enjoy in this movie. But overall, I think there's just so much stuff where it falls flat. Like with the Toriel subplot. Like with some of the ways that, like, they kind of make the Thorin falling to evil a little bit too over the top for me. That it's, like, a lot of the subtlety in Armitage's performance feels like it's just kind of pulled for this, like, really, like, in your face, I am, like, evil and possessed by gold now, or whatever. And in the whole third movie feels like a really big action scene at some point that just makes it kind of unsatisfying as a standalone movie. So it's something where it's like, it's not terrible. I mean, I'm glad I watched it, but it feels like, in retrospect, like the only movie that I came out satisfied with was the first one, even if it had its problems. And when I look back on, even though I haven't watched the 3 of them in close succession to one another, I can't imagine that they would work really well. I would probably, like, the flaws would probably stand out more, if anything, if you watch them in that format.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of that. I've seen this film twice now, and, I wrote my review and then I saw it again, and I think a lot of what I said in my review, like, I stand by what I said in my review, and it's a fairly positive review with a lot of caveats. But, where my reaction is tempered, and I've been trying to think of how I would sum this up, I think the Battle of the Five Armies, to me, fulfills all the things the Hobbit series was doing well, and it fulfills all the things it was doing poorly.
Yeah,
and
that's a good way to put it. It in no way turns around the series,
I think the things that it was doing well pay off rather wonderfully, and maybe more than I was expecting. I think definitely there's a lack of subtlety in the writing for Thorin here that is occasionally problematic, but where it really counts to me, they did that character justice, really paid off on 2 films worth. And, when you get to the scene where Thorin is lying there dying, and Bilbo and Martin Freeman...
He's so good.
Oh my god. When he's trying to do the thing where he's just trying to cope with this death, and he's saying, the eagles, and he runs out of words, and he just has to stop. That might be the best reaction to death in all 6 Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah. And it's something that, I remember... Because I went and I saw it with my family, and I remember saying afterwards, I was like... That's such a cliche moment, because that happens in all, because by necessity, it happens in, almost every single movie where characters die, is you have the scene where the dude dies, and, the guy who didn't die, but is his friend, is sitting there and is like, no! That's, that's that scene. But, part of it is that they don't quite write it that way, and the other part of it is that Martin Freeman, he just, makes that scene feel so honest. He makes the whole performance, and it's epitomized in that scene, feel so honest and natural that it makes he holds these 3 movies up far more than any actor should have to hold up a movie.
No, yeah, absolutely, and I think when he gets home and he fulfills that sentence and he says, "Who was Thorin Oakenshield to you?" and he says, "He was my friend." I think what the Battle of the Five Armies does well, and why for me, in some sense, I think it works the best as a movie of all 3 of these, and I'm still undecided on that, is that I think it hones in on that main arc of Bilbo and Thorin better than the other movies did, in that this becomes everything that happens in the Battle of the Five Armies, or almost everything, radiates outward from that central argument, which is Thorin has become obsessed by greed, Bilbo just wants the best for his friends, and this big conflict extends outwards from there, but I feel like there was a focus editorially to this film where whenever they cut back to Bilbo or Thorin, the weight was there. Sure, and when they were away from them, the weight still felt there. That's what I complained about with the first 2 movies, is that when they cut away from Bilbo, it felt weightless, aimless, shiftless. Here, there are definitely moments like that when you see Alfred or something.
Yeah.
But even in the Tariel subplot, which I don't love, but I think isn't a total disaster, and I know you probably disagree with me on that. But I think there are moments where, for instance, just, all the stuff with the elves and kind of their insularity and whatnot does thematically play into this main relationship, which is essentially this story of friendship between these 2 unlikely friends, of a hobbit and a dwarf, and this respect. And I think when you get to that last scene, and it's Bilbo at home, and he says, he was my friend, and then he's looking around at his empty house, and basically, and I think it might be the smartest scene in all 3 Hobbit movies, is that they end with him just looking silently around Bag End and basically having to reflect on, this is my life now, is rebuilding. Because now my life is, I've torn myself down, I am empty, and I have to learn how to live again. And I actually kind of wish they had ended on that silent note instead of the loud Lord of the Rings callback.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful moment, and it contextualizes the Hobbit series as this story of an unlikely person who got to be the right hand of a king. Mm-hmm. And I think they honed in on that so well that it makes me wish for the 1 or 2 movie version of The Hobbit where that was everything. Because, and that's what I mean when I say this amplifies what the series did well and what it did poorly, because that amplification of those things, what the Hobbit series does well, comes through so loud and clear in the Battle of the Five Armies. As you say, the action is spectacular. Nobody does large-scale interconnected war scenes better than Peter Jackson, and I mean across film history. He is just the best at that, I think, on that scale. And I think there's some problems with the action here. You talk about what's amplified. Good God, the CGI in this is awful.
Yeah.
Just unbearable.
And there is, there's just something that I hadn't thought about this since I had seen the movie, but there's just something about the way you just said it. There's also a certain point where some of the action scenes in this movie, especially with the CGI, this movie goes a little bit anime in some ways, in terms of how it's at some point it feels like Thorin should have gone Super Saiyan, or Legolas should have started shooting moonbeams out of his sword or something. Right,
and I'm not saying that I think all the action beats work, but the overall scope of things, it's so impressive. General, yeah, and I think they managed to work in great character stuff throughout that. Even if you don't like Tauriel as a character and where they take Feely and her in this movie, she and all of that stuff with the elves is well integrated into the larger area. It's like the Seven Samurai principle of you understand where everything's happening at different points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
You know, definitely has learned from the master Kurosawa on that, which is great. But yeah, so all of those things. But then, like, the things it does poorly. When you want to talk about an extraneous character, I don't point to Tariel, I point to Alfred.
Yeah, like, but Alfred's so mind-numbingly extraneous that you forget that he's even in the movie, which I did until we started talking about it.
Yeah.
And you, like, mentioned, it's like, so what did you think about Alfred? I was like, oh, fuck, that's right, that guy was in the movie.
Because that's even a case where I don't think the performance is that good. And I think that's by design. That's what the actor's being asked to do. But, like, you know, at least...
the whole idea is just bad.
Yeah, it's bad. So there's all of that. I think the Dol Guldur stuff ultimately goes nowhere. It ends in a kind of cool scene, but it meant nothing to the movie. You could take it all out.
It feels like something that's like, if they just edited all of that together, it would have been like a cool short on the Lord of the Rings DVD, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Like a side story. Like they did with Watchmen, where they took out the
Tales of the Black Traitor.
Yeah, and they just did an animated movie, which was actually kind of good.
Yeah, no, like that's one of the biggest disappointments of this movie. Is like the whole time I was like, you could find a cool way to integrate this if you did it well. But I think, like, if Assassin's Creed has taught us anything about writing stories, it's that writing parallel storylines is really fucking hard.
It is.
So, and a lot of people don't know how to do it. And I think this is a good example of, like, it's just the Dol Guldur stuff feels so completely unconnected from all the red, like, and it has the whole time. It was like, this is your own, obviously, like, this last movie, it was their only chance to, like, make it feel like this has some sort of relevance to the rest of what's going on, and they never justified its existence.
So I want to be clear in my reaction. I think primarily this is a good movie, and I think primarily it does good things. But I felt it the first time I saw it, and I felt it much more the second time I saw it. When you get to the end and the credits roll, I was kind of like, so what? Mm-hmm. It did not leave the... Even though it has all those great pieces, I feel like it has been stretched out so much and has so many flaws. The impact is so diluted that you just get to the end, and I felt kind of numb. And when I get to the end of Return of the King, no matter how many times I see that, how many years later it is, when you get to those last scenes of Return of the King, you're kind of emotionally devastated.
Yeah.
And euphoric, like these warring reactions inside you, but you feel a lot, and you feel more than anything the message, I think, you know, Professor Tolkien was striving for.
Yeah.
And I don't think you get that in the Hobbit series. You get to the end, and you're like, it ultimately felt kind of empty to me. And I think that's a really interesting reaction you can have where, and it teaches you something about pacing and storytelling. You can have as many good elements as you want. Yeah. And I think the Hobbit series, if you just take the individual pieces, we could go on all day about all the good pieces.
Yeah.
But when you put it all together, it's so much less than the sum of parts. And that's a problem.
Yeah, it's the way that everything comes together. Like, that's how you experience the story. That's how the story has to function. It's just like, if you have, like, one character like Alfred, you know, sustaining through a whole movie, like, that can practically kill a movie, you know? That it's just, like, it's so distracting, it's so out of place, and it's so bad. It's just in everything about it, in the writing, in the performance, like, and I kind of agree with you that I feel like it's not, like, the actor's fault that, like, the performance is bad, but it's, like, just feels awkward because of everything involving with it. And just, like, the scenes themselves being bad scenes that don't contribute like something meaningful to the overall plot. Like, it just so kills the momentum of the movie and so dilutes its focus that you just feel so disappointed and just kind of like, nothing at the end, where you're like, man, there's some shit in this movie that is amazing and so well done, but that doesn't matter if you dilute it with all this, of like these stupid subplots and poorly written characters along the way.
Yeah, so let's stick with this movie for a minute. Let's just go back and forth and talk about different scenes or characters that we want to talk about. I think there's one you want to get off your chest.
The Toriel.
I think you want to talk about Tariel.
Yeah, and like, and that's not just restricted to this movie. It's this one in Desolation of Smaug. And I suppose, like, you know, Evangeline Lilly is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with her performance. Or with Feely. Which one is it, Feely or Keely?
It's Feely.
Or with Feely. Like,
but I think they're both really good.
Yeah, they're really good. Like, yeah, and they do have chemistry with each other. And also Orlando Bloom as Legolas, I think he's fucking really
We'll talk about him in a minute.
Because he's also kind of, because it's a love triangle, so he's involved. And his, all the performances are good, or like sometimes really good, but it's the whole idea of that subplot that, like, it's so Hollywood needing a romance subplot. It just screams to me, we need to attract the female demographic. And it just feels completely... Because obviously it's written...
pandering.
Yeah, it's pandering. And it's obviously written for the movie. It's not a part of the book in any shape. Because, her character literally does not exist. There is no romance subplot that exists in The Hobbit in any form. Nor is this pulled from any of the existing material. It's fabricated entirely for this movie. And it does not justify why it's there at all. The only thing, maybe you can appreciate it that it does, is that it gives something for one of the other dwarves other than Thorin to do, that at some point outside of the first movie, the rest of the dwarves start feeling a little bit superfluous, to the point where in this one, basically all the dwarves except for Thorin, Dwalin, Fili, and Kili are outside of the whole, last section of the movie.
Yeah. Balin gets a big scene.
Yeah, he gets a big scene, but he's still after the four dwarves go up to that cliff, none of the other dwarves are seen until the very end of the film.
Yeah.
And so it that's something that's nice, but it does not in any way justify the huge amount of focus that is put on it in these two movies. And it's something that feels so pandering, so awkward. It's so completely unbelievable in the terms of the character relationships in that action movie romance subplot in just the worst way. I cannot in any way buy, regardless of how good the performance is and how much chemistry these people have, I cannot buy that these two characters are that in love. They might like each other and enjoy each other's company and have a crush on each other or something, but it's not this super binding eternal love like Aragorn and Arwen is, because it justifies itself in the context of the movie as being a past relationship. Here, it's you meet both of those characters, and you see both of those characters meet, and there's at no point that you're well, of course these two characters are in love. How could they not be?
Yeah. I don't think it's completely... I agree with most of what you say. I understand the logic of it on a couple of levels, just in so much as it gives Fili something to do and fleshes out his character so that his death means something more than he's one of the rhyming dwarves. It adds some more stakes to the kind of plot they're doing of elves maybe coming around to accepting other races, which is something that you could have in these movies, which would be fine. What I was ultimately disappointed with is that I actually was interested in both of these characters, Fili and Tariel, more coming out of Desolation of Smaug than... obviously she's not in Unexpected Journey, but Fili didn't make much of an impression in that movie. He did in the second one. She definitely did in the second one, because in that second film, while by the end it's a lot about the romance, she is not defined totally through that. At the beginning, she's cool other elf we meet, and she's a really great character in Desolation of Smaug. I think she's one of my favorite parts of that film, is that I felt up until that romance kicks into high gear, she seems like a good addition in that she fleshes out the universe of the elves. She's a cool point of entry character, because Legolas is still fairly cold and distant at this point. Thranduil is, but she kind of gives us a different perspective. It didn't just feel like empty pandering, because if you wanted to have a female elf in there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. It's how you choose to use her. And I kind of felt a little uneasy by the end of Desolation of Smaug, because she and Fili are so clearly headed in that direction, but it could be going somewhere else. I didn't know. I wanted to reserve judgment until this movie. And what I don't like about how this movie handles it is both of them are reduced 100% to just that romance.
Yeah, exactly.
Tariel, in some sense, feels like a different character than the one we met, because she doesn't care about anything else. She's just there for this dwarf whose name she barely knows. When she says his name out loud in this movie, I was surprised, because I don't know where she learned it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that kind of thing.
It's just where it's you've not justified this relationship in any way, and it's so mechanical in how it functions in the story. It's so non-organic, where it just so feels we need a romance subplot, we need something for this dwarf to do at some point. We need a subplot revolving around him, so let's just manufacture this really mechanical, gross romance subplot that does it says something that they had to fabricate a female character to have a female character in The Hobbit, whatever for that. That's its own thing with when that book was written and stuff. But it's way more disgusting to me that it's you then so you have to create this female character for this movie from the ground up, and then you just turn her into the most pandering, disgusting idea of like what you need to do to get women to watch this movie.
Like, she also loses all agency,
Yeah.
which I found offensive, as you say. She can't even help herself by the end of the movie. Legolas has to do everything.
Yeah, it's
so it becomes more sexist than if there were no women.
Exactly. Like that's how I feel about it. This is like, you should have just cut out this character, and it's like we wouldn't have to be having this like weird, awkward conversation about like, why did you have this character in this movie? Like, what was your objective?
And really, there is a disappointment there because I did think there was potential here. Like,
Yeah.
if there was no romance, or let's say if they were just friends or something like that.
Yeah,
if they
exactly.
just are learning to
If
like
it could
each
have
other.
just been platonic. Like,
Yeah.
these guys need to watch some fucking like Ghibli movies. You know,
Right.
It's like you can have two, like a male character and a female character, and they don't have to fall in love, but they can still have a close like bonded relationship.
Yeah, that happens in real life too.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think because I like the idea of Tariel, I like the idea of an expanded role for Feely. I think the way they design both of those characters fighting, especially Tariel, is really cool. And it's disappointing when at the end he's killed because he loves her and doesn't pay attention, and she just kind of becomes a rag doll in the fight. You know?
Yeah.
Like, did Evangeline Lilly for 2 weeks just have to be thrown around a green screen crying?
Probably.
You know, God, I kind of feel bad for her. I feel bad for a lot of the actors in this movie with relation to green screen stuff.
I mean, have you heard... I don't know if this is 100% true, but have you heard the story that, like, originally, like, she wanted... Like, she said, like, I will only do this movie if you do not write a love triangle, because she's obviously stuck in love triangle stuff, especially, like, coming off the back of Lost, and then they did rewrites and put a love triangle in for the character.
God, that doesn't surprise me at all, because I can definitely imagine that the 2-movie version of this did not have that.
Yeah,
romance.
it couldn't have it. Like, there wouldn't be time to have it.
No. It was probably all invented. Yeah.
Again, I don't know if that's 100% true, but I read it on the internet. So.
I'm guessing I would not doubt that. I mean, it
certainly sounds plausible to how like studios make movies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and how these movies were made, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I want to talk about something I did like here.
Okay. Yeah.
So related to that, I thought they did a phenomenal job with Legolas in these 2 movies, where I think one of my big problems with all 3 of these movies, and as they work as a whole, is I think they took the prequel thing way too seriously. You really, I don't think, when you're adapting The Hobbit, should stress the relation to Lord of the Rings. Because if you do that, it inherently pales in comparison, because they are such different stories on such different scales.
Yeah.
You have to tell it on the scale it was told on, which is just as this one Hobbit's perspective on this big adventure. But this adventure is not significant in the history of Middle-earth, and no matter how much...
Yeah, like, the only connection it has is the ring... in, like, that one scene with Gollum.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, the ring it functions totally different from how it does in Lord of the Rings in some ways. And how it's like, he's not affected by it otherwise.
But all their attempts to try to say, like, oh, the Dol Sauron is rising, and we're going to have to defeat him someday, and he wants the Lonely Mountain because it's a strategic position, which makes no goddamn sense.
Yeah, exactly.
All of those things. That just makes me think The Hobbit looks kind of lame in comparison to Lord of the Rings. What makes The Hobbit special is not that it is a big story like Lord of the Rings. What makes it special is that it's the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's this little story of a little person who goes on a big adventure for him, and it means something to all the characters in it, and that's what matters, is the personal perspective.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings is about the national perspective. It's the biggest thing to ever happen in this world.
Yeah, like,
and
it's the end of the third age.
Yeah. The Hobbit is not...
this is a footnote in the Third Age.
And I think they tried to tell the Lord of the Rings version of The Hobbit, which is problematic. But the one thing they did right on that prequel level to me is that Legolas feels like a different character here who gradually grows into a character who will become the one we know and love.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because if you look at Lord of the Rings... Legolas doesn't really have an arc. He comes to befriend Gimli, but other than that, he's the same guy at the beginning as he is at the end. By design, because he's old at that point. I mean, he doesn't look it, but he's world-weary. He knows the world. Not world-weary, but he's world-wise.
Yeah.
You know, and he's one of those characters who doesn't need to have an arc, because that's just where he is, and that's how he functions in things. And putting that extra spotlight on him here, for one, I thought Orlando Bloom did a great job.
Yeah, definitely.
A really good version of that character. I thought it was interesting to see him grapple with his own kind of... ego. You know, there's that moment in Desolation of Smaug where he bleeds for the first time and he gets hurt, and kind of learning that there are bigger forces than him and things that he can't beat, and kind of learning that there's this perspective bigger than just the elves and his realm, which is another place where they kind of messed up the Tariel story, I think, because they could have drawn those lines clearer, that she kind of helps him realize that. When you add in romance, it just muddies all of that.
Yeah.
So, too bad. But anyway, so... yeah, there's all of that. So I think they did a really good job with Legolas. He has some of the best fight scenes. There's definitely an anime kind of feel to his fight with Bolg, where he has to run up the steps. But you know what? I thought it was cool when he grabs the crow. I mean, that's all of Legolas's moments in Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. It's that probably is stupid, but fuck it, it's cool.
Yeah,
and I'm okay with that because if you have one character who's kind of a superhero, that's okay.
Yeah.
And honestly, his fight with Bolg was a lot better than Thorin's fight with Azog, and I want to talk about that in a little bit because that was laughably terrible. But we'll get there. So I thought they did great with Legolas. I also thought they did a phenomenal job with Bard the Bowman. Mm-hmm. And how he becomes this hero in this movie. I think the opening scene of the Battle of the Five Armies is one of the best scenes in the movie. And just seeing Bard kind of take up that mantle of hero in that scene and that interchange he has with his son. Luke Evans is one of those actors in these movies who's just better than what he's being given and kind of elevating stuff. He's so good. He's one of those actors in this series who walks out of this franchise a movie star instant. And I love what they give him to do here up until a certain point where Bard just kind of disappears from the movie with Alfred.
And that was disappointing. To do at some point.
Yeah, and they should have, because I think you could write and orient him in such a way that you show he is significant in this battle, because the men are one of the armies and they are a significant part of this, and they kind of forget about them, and that disappointed me. It does feel like they made a concentrated effort to make this movie shorter, and I think some things got left on the side that shouldn't, and some things that were left in should have been left out.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, Alfred.
Yeah. And then I do want to make fun of Azog, because we said over and over in the first two, Azog's terrible, and so much of the climax is going to rely on him. Can it work? The answer is, good God, no. I thought that scene where Thorin, goes to confront Azog and ultimately gets killed, they did everything wrong, I thought, in that scene, where other than he gets Legolas's sword, I thought that was cool. Yeah. But then from that, they're doing the thing on the ice, and Azog is throwing his CGI chain onto the CGI ice, and Richard Armitage clearly is not looking at him because he's on a green screen. And then he gets Azog under the ice in a fucking pratfall Charlie Chaplin moment that's much lower than anything Charlie Chaplin would ever do because he's a genius. And Azog's floating under the ice, and Richard Armitage...
It's just like why... What do you... You do realize that people don't drown in 3 seconds, right, Thorin?
Yeah.
It's a really frustrating moment where it's like, why are you just... What? He's not dead yet! Why do you think he's dead? Are you a fucking idiot?
Yeah. It's
not even going by action movie rules, by going by real life expectations, you've not won this fight.
It's a problem because the whole movie is an action scene building up to that confrontation. And there's a lot of stuff working against it in that we're never going to take Azog seriously with that design and that CGI. That's just never going to happen. But you could at least design a good fight. And I thought they tried to overcompensate by, okay, we've got bad CGI, let's do lots more bad CGI. And I didn't, Thorin gets stabbed and is dying, I didn't feel anything until Bilbo enters the picture and Azog's gone and it's just them alone with less CGI. Mm-hmm. Then the moment works, but the actual thing that leads to Thorin's death means nothing because of how they staged it, to me, at least.
I don't hate it as much as you do, but it's not a good fight. Especially when you compare it to other fights that are in the movie, like Legolas versus Bolg. It feels very underwhelming, and it's just it's not particularly well choreographed. And Azog is the CG on his character has always been really bad in particular.
And I thought the effects throughout this movie were awful. And I know on a technical level, obviously a lot of people put a lot of hard work into this, and it's not, it's not like a $10 million movie or something. Mm-hmm. There is good work going on here throughout. There's a lot of CGI you probably don't even know is CGI, for instance. Mm-hmm. But so much of as well staged as things are, so much of the battle looked like people standing on green screens with really obvious compositing, where they don't quite know what they're looking at, and the cuts were really awkward. Whenever they cut to who's the Dane, the dwarf leader, he looked like he was on a different soundstage in a different part of the world. Yeah. There's just so much of that was constantly taking me out of the movie. When you watch a battle scene in Lord of the Rings, they're out there on the field with extras doing that, and it looks real, and you buy into it.
Yeah, there's definitely also this. There's some of those scenes where it's the armies clashing, where it's some of it where it looks worse than similar shots that were all CG in the Lord of the Rings movies. Where it's just some of this animation just looks so stiff. It looks very video game like in a lot of places.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of textures that don't look fully finished, and things like there's a lot of color and lighting effects that honestly became, because An Unexpected Journey has the most location photography, and it's the best looking of the movies on every level. And then with Desolation of Smaug and this one, which are basically animated movies, they're like Avatar. They're just shot on green screen.
Yeah, it's like when you're on like Lake Town and those kinds of locations where you're just like, this is, or like when they're up in the icy place, it's like half of the shots are like, this is just on the green screen.
Yeah, there's almost nothing physical in these last two movies, and it just doesn't look good at all to me. I don't think the cinematography is that interesting. The color looks really washed out and awkward. Did you see this in high frame rate?
No, this was the only one we didn't.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Yeah,
it probably would have looked better.
It was too much of a hassle to see it this time.
Yeah, same here. And I think it says something about kind of the series at this point that we don't have the enthusiasm to go back and check it out.
To go like seek it out in that format.
Oh well, but in any case, so those are my kind of thoughts on the movie. Anything else you wanted to say about different scenes or anything?
Could we talk about how like the movie just starts like you just pause the last one and then it's just like, oh, look at the movie's going. Like they take no effort whatsoever to try to situate you in like what is going on, like what has been set up, what we're paying off on. It's like literally just starting at the end point of the last movie. Like there's no effort made to make it feel like this is a separate movie. It's just like, okay, we're going.
I thought that scene was edited well enough and oriented well enough that it worked as a kickoff point in some ways, that I think you could have salvaged it if you did one thing different. They just shouldn't have started it there. Like, I think if you added some kind of prologue scene, like the Return of the King has, where you start with Gollum in the past, because if you think about it, Return of the King actually does something very similar.
Yeah.
Because all the footage in the first like half hour of Return of the King was shot for Two Towers. So it was a very similar thing. And I think you would notice that more if that's just where they dumped you. But because they have some kind of palate cleanser, you kick into it better.
It's also a thing where it's like you're starting with the climax of a different movie.
This is my point.
I think even if you edited it that way at some point, like if you had shot like some other material, like there's something about like the way it's shot where like, especially because I have not seen Desolation of Smaug since I saw it in the theater. So it's like I do not remember like the specific beats they were setting up at the end of that movie. So there's stuff where it's like Bard is trying to get like there's like the black arrow that's part of like that statue or whatever the fuck that is. I don't remember that being set up in Desolation of Smaug. Yeah. So I'm like, what are you trying to get? Why are you trying to get like it's because it's trying to pay off things that were set up in the last movie, but it's not addressed the fact that those are set up, so you're not reminded by it at all. No, you're completely lost.
I totally agree, and I'm just kind of trying to be charitable.
Yeah.
But this was my point last year, and I think we were flipping roles last year. You were a little more optimistic.
Well, it was a thing where it's like, it could work. Like, you could make it work if you did it in a different way. But it's like, it just literally feels like they paused the movie.
Yeah, but I honestly didn't know if there was a way it could work, and I don't really think there was a way, the way they split it, because the whole second half of Desolation of Smaug, which was intended to be the first half of the second movie, clearly, everything in that is setting up that scene with Smaug. Everything. Where, you have the exposition about the Black Arrow. You have the kid leaving the Black Arrow in the boat. That's a big scene that is not paid off in that movie, which is bizarre. Because there's one thing to, like, set up a cliffhanger. It's another to set up little tiny pieces of a cliffhanger here and there, and then just cut your movie off. I really wonder if we got Peter Jackson in 10 years under truth serum or something, if he would say some things like... They just didn't finish Desolation of Smaug in time, and that's why they had to end it where they ended it. Or the studio thought we spent too much money and needed 3 movies, and that's why we cut it like this. I mean, these are not creative choices from a guy that talented. They just aren't.
It feels like completely baffling. Like, how did anyone decide? Because it reminds me a little bit of when I watched the last 2 Harry Potter movies, because that does that part 1, part 2 thing. But even that's like was way easier to follow in terms of like, okay, like
the scene finishes.
Yeah, it's like I need to you need to do a little work to remind me of like what the fucking wand or whatever is. But like that's all they needed to do, And I was someone who didn't read the Harry Potter books, and I was able to follow that split easier than I was here, where I've read the fucking book like over a dozen times. It's like I was just like watching this like. What? Like, this is how... What the fuck? Like, where are we? What are we doing? What's going on?
Yeah.
It's like... Because it was like a thing where I agree with you when you said that like the stuff they do with Bard and Smaug and his son in that scene is really cool, and so I want to like watch the movie in a setting where I was like, I'm not focusing on like trying to situate myself in this movie when I'm watching the climax to the movie.
But I mean, it's just a weird thing where even if you had Deathslayer and Smaug and Battle of the Five Armies next to each other and did an intermission, that'd be a dumb place for an intermission. That's how bad a split that is.
Yeah,
I mean,
true, yeah.
It's baffling. It's like I said, if Two Towers ended with them firing the first shot of the Battle of Helm's Deep. It's the exact same thing. And they don't do that. They finish the story. And I mean, this is how baffling it is that Peter Jackson cut Saruman out of the Return of the King because he said, and I think this was wise, you can't kill the film 2 villain in film 3.
Yeah.
That was his logic, and it worked really well for the theatrical cut of that movie. I'm glad we have those scenes now for the extended version, because I do like it as a fan, but I get why he said that. That would be odd.
I agree with that.
And I don't know how he went from that in 2003 to this in 2014.
Although, just like something about that, just like it made me think about like the fucking Christopher Lee had that exact scenario happen to him in Star Wars. Also,
that's true.
They killed the film 2 villain at the beginning of film 3 in the Star Wars prequels. It's fucking Christopher Lee. It's something in his contract where he plays a villain. There.
Oh, one other scene we have to talk about: Dol Guldur, Lord of the Rings fighting game scene.
Yeah. Or like Galadriel
goes
Super Saiyan. They put in the code to unlock the Galadriel character.
It's like
it's so ridiculous.
I was just giggling through that scene the first time because I thought it was so out there. It's like the most elaborate, finely made Lord of the Rings fanfic ever, but it still feels like fanfic.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you just kind of slap your face and you're like, you do realize that one of the things that made Galadriel so cool and intimidating is that you never saw her do anything.
Yeah.
It was just that, like, you were in Lothlorien and, like, there's all, like, this talk about, like, oh, there's the fucking Witch of the Woods and shit, and then you meet her and she has that, like, great scene where she's like, instead of a lord, you would have a queen! Great and terrible to behold! Like, that shit's so cool. And then they're like, but let's actually, like, do that. And they use, like, the same effect and shit from Fellowship of the Ring for it. It's like, no! That's cool about her is that you get the sense that she's powerful, but you also get the sense that she's not the kind of person that needs to go out there and, like, throw magic bolts at people,
But, I thought they messed that up with Gandalf in the previous movie, too, where he's going through Dol Guldur just waving his stick around. And
yeah, it's like this whole movie gets a little bit, or like this whole series gets a little bit anime in a lot of places.
Because if you think about it, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, there's only 2 times total when Gandalf uses what we could obviously recognize as magic, and neither time does it seem obvious what he's doing.
Yeah.
It's with, You Shall Not Pass,
Balrog.
which is a great moment. That's what he does in the book, I mean, for, God's sake. And then in Return of the King, when he rides out with the Gondorian army. And but it's just a little thing. It's not.
It's something that I've always really appreciated about Lord of the Rings' magic is that there is a part of it where you're not sure if he's actually casting spells or if it's just something where it's like, he knows how to use trickery in some interesting way, like he can like throw his voice or stuff with like the trolls and Hobbit. Yeah. That's like. It's not, it's not Harry Potter. It's not like fucking you shouting some Latin in like a big cartoonish lightning bolt spouting from a stick. It's like I'm playing these mind games, and that's what's cool about Gandalf.
Yeah, there's a wisdom more than a force, right?
Yeah, it is like when you're playing the Lord of the Rings Return of the King game, and it's like they make concessions to just have Gandalf shooting magic bolts from his staff. Because it's like, well, every character has a ranged attack, and that's what you need Gandalf to do. So it's like, fine. In the video game, fine. In the movie, not so much.
Alright, so Battle of Five Armies, that's our 2 cents on that. Trilogy as a whole, I don't even know what area to tackle this from. Should this have been 3 movies?
No. God, no. I still stand by my statement that it could have been done well. Like, I don't regret saying, like, when this choice was made, of, like, let's wait and see how it's going to turn out. Because I still, in my head, it's like, you could have done it. It's not an impossible task, but they just did not go about it the right way. Like, even if you, like, and as you, like, found earlier that there already are some fan edits of these movies, that, like, even if you make a good fan edit, like, there's still stuff about the movies that's awkward in terms of, like, the CG's still bad in so many places. There's still a lot of bad decisions they made, like Goblin Town in the first movie. That's just shit. Like, the choreography of the Azog movie, or the Azog fight in this movie. Like, there's a lot of decisions that they made that were bad decisions, even if this was not 3 movies. But the fact that it is 3 movies and they had to put so much bloat on it just exacerbates everything to a ridiculous degree. That's so disappointing.
Yeah, and I think this is what I said. You know, I want to say something here. I'm going to go back to my opinion when the first movie came out. But I did go into all these with an open mind. You know, and I tried to keep an open mind throughout, which most people didn't, and that still disappoints me. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to judge these now that we've got all the evidence finally.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I said with An Unexpected Journey was that I was disappointed that they lost the tree for the forest. They had great Bilbo, and they just lost him in the mix of everything else in that first movie. And then they lost him in the mix of everything else in that second movie. And I thought they kind of found him again here in the third one, but it was kind of too late.
Yeah, because it was amidst a lot of nonsense.
Yes, it was. And I think that's the problem, is overall these lack focus. And while the Lord of the Rings movies are much bigger, they're longer, they're much more eventful, so much more story happens, there are so many more characters, they feel so much more focused. Mm-hmm. Whenever you cut back to Frodo and Sam, that's the weight. When you're away from them, you know that's the weight. There's nothing extraneous, even in the extended edition of Return of the King, there's a couple of extraneous moments, but mostly it's fine.
Yeah.
That's
the extended edition. That's not like the definitive cut.
Right. So there is a focus to that series. This one just doesn't have it. And as you say, it's the bloat is the main enemy here, where I think there's a lot of scenes that would have impact if the pace were better. This should have been 2 movies. When I think about having all the footage now and knowing what the split was going to be, which if you don't know, and I should say again, they had the first movie done and edited before they made the split, because they had at Comic-Con 2012, 6 months, less than 6 months before that movie came out, they had posters showing the Barrels Out of Bond sequence, which was going to be the finale to film 1. So film 1 was going to go up through Barrels Out of Bond, and it would end with them meeting Bard. And then film 2, I just broke a chair. We're okay. Film 2, Sean's shaking his head. I'm sorry.
It's my fucking chair.
Okay, I'll fix it. I'm not actually I don't know how to fix it.
No, you don't know how to fix anything.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Okay, film 2 was going to be obviously that to the end. So, starting with them getting to Lake Town. So kind of completing that there and back again arc. That would have been a really good 2 movies, I think. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that first movie would have had a clear kick to it. You would have had all those big adventures on their way there. That would have been great. It would have been focused, I feel like, because it would be the arc of the book where it's Bilbo helping the dwarves and earning their respect over the course of things. And then film 2 would have been dealing with Smaug. And I think if you kept the Battle of the Five Armies to maybe 45 minutes at the end of that, you could have pulled out all that's good about this, and it would have worked
exactly.
really well.
And built up some of the Arkenstone stuff a little bit more explicitly a little earlier on. Yeah, you could have absolutely made this.
And then I think,
much better movies.
Yeah. So all of those, and then you wouldn't have had the Tariel romance.
Yeah.
You probably would have had all the good Legolas stuff without some of the bad stuff, which is like the love triangle and whatnot. Yeah. You would have not have had as much. You probably would have had to cut Goblin Town entirely to make time for Gollum. All of those things.
Cut it down pretty heavily from not that bloated, ridiculous CG action scene.
You're sure as shit would not have had Alfred.
You wouldn't have had them fighting Smaug, then Smaug getting away, and then us killing Smaug. And it's like, why did we fight Smaug in the fucking first place like that?
Yeah, there's still such, and that's the other thing, is there's such awkward vestiges of that original 2 movie version in here. I mean, if you pay attention, Bilbo changes costume at the point where film 2 would have started in Desolation of Smaug, and he keeps it through the end. They clearly costumed him for 2 movies. He has one costume for the first, one for the other. It's things like that are just really awkward.
Manufactured cliffhanger, or manufactured climaxes for the second movie.
Yeah. I think it would have been tough to do in one movie. I also think you could have done it.
Yeah, it would have been a very different movie,
very different. Yeah. But,
if you did one movie, I can't imagine you doing one movie and still having Battle of Five Armies in there.
No, you couldn't.
That, it would be too much, but...
Yeah. So, it's just a wasted opportunity. And I wonder... and I don't think... no matter what, this never would have lived up to Lord of the Rings. It was always going to be...
It's so different.
Yeah. And it was always going to be, I feel like, kind of the minor work next to this major work, because... it's the same guy making it. I think it would have had more of a chance if Guillermo del Toro had done his version.
Yeah.
Because then you wouldn't have to compare them really as much.
And it's the kind of thing, it's the reason, this is the reason why An Unexpected Journey is my favorite of the 3, is because that's the one that even if it has, like, I hate the Goblin Town shit, and the Rivendell section is so slow, but, like, it still feels like that's a Hobbit movie, Like even for all that stuff, it still feels like it has that sort of, like, fun pace to it. It's got the great character stuff. It's got, like, and it has the fucking riddles in the dark scene, which is so good.
Yeah.
It's like that's a fucking Hobbit movie. And then Desolation of Smaug, like, that's my major disappointment with it, is that it's like, well, now this is just a Lord of the Rings movie, because now it's not just like, the Goblin Town fight scene I don't like, but I understand why it's there in the sense of, like, that's the major fight at the end of that movie. That's like the big fight for that movie. Like, okay, I don't love that, but I understand why it exists. But then it's like, then you get the second movie, and it's like, no, we have that, like, exact same thing you're doing now for the fucking barrel scene. And you don't need to do that now. Like, even if that fight scene is a lot cooler than any of than the Goblin Town scene, it's like, you're just, like, making these fucking action scenes because the Lord of the Rings has a lot of action in it. But that's because the Lord of the Rings needs to, because that's what its story is. It's like The Hobbit doesn't need to have all these ridiculous, over-the-top action scenes. And that just, like...
And you could have...
it evolves so much over the movies where right at the end, it's an anime, almost.
Yeah. And you could have earned some of those action scenes, though. Like, if the Barrels Out of Bond scene was the finale to the first movie, and it was bringing everything together for the end of this first big epic movie, then having it be the big action scene would feel so natural.
Yeah, it would feel, like kind of like how the Goblin Town scene is, like, if you had that Goblin Town action scene in the middle of a movie, you'd be like, why the fuck does this even exist? It being at the end of the movie, it's just a bad action scene, but that still justifies why it's there, even if it's just a bad execution.
Yeah, so... Definitely, there's just a couple ways to take these questions. So it shouldn't have been 3 movies. Do you consider this series a disappointment?
It's a disappointment. I don't think... It's not bad. Like, okay. It's bad in some ways. It's not terrible. There's a lot of good stuff to it. I think a lot of people, particularly on the internet, surprise, surprise, like, blow it out of proportion. I think they don't recognize where the good does lie in these movies, but it's definitely a disappointment.
And I wanted to say that because, I went into that first Hobbit movie as excited as I've ever been for a movie because, as you might have heard, Lord of the Rings is my favorite movie ever. Yeah. And I was disappointed then. I'm still disappointed. However, I try to find nuance in positions.
Yeah.
The internet does not. I am disappointed, and I'm still glad we have these movies. Even in this bloated fucking form, I'm glad we have Martin Freeman's Bilbo.
Yeah.
Cinema is better for it.
I'm glad we have that riddle in the dark scene.
I'm glad we have Richard Armitage's Thorin.
Yeah.
I'm glad we have all the dwarves, honestly, because they were all great. I'm glad we have some of these action scenes. I'm glad we have more of that music. I'm glad we have a little more of Middle-earth, even though most of it was not New Zealand, which was a bummer.
I'm glad we got Legolas back and, like, did something interesting with his character in a way that you would never expect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad we got some more Gandalf, because you can always
use more
Gandalf.
We should have said that. Ian McKellen, really good in this last one.
I'm glad I got to see Sylvester McCoy with fake bird poop on his head.
Sure. Yeah, I should say, so we talked about fan edits.
Yeah.
I've looked at one. The first one, I think, this is probably the first one to really come out, because it's just that third movie is not widely available. I think you can pirate it, because it's leaked over Academy screeners, but yeah. So this guy over, I guess if you read his website, you can find this online, linked in various places, but this dude edited the Hobbit trilogy into one 4-hour movie, and he, I guess, just did it over this last weekend, so it's kind of a rush job, but it's an interesting thing, and he's not a professional editor or anything. So there's little inconsistencies, like he just starts the movie with Gandalf coming to talk to Bilbo at Bag End. Cuts out all that prologue shit. Which I think is a good choice. It actually feels good, except it still says 60 years earlier there. Which I understand why he couldn't fix that. Mm-hmm. You probably could work around that at some point, but it'd be tough. So anyway, it still says there's things like that. But it's interesting. So he basically gets... I just watched some different scenes. He gets through that first movie in about 90 minutes, and how he transitions from 1 to 2, which is kind of tough because 1 has a clear climax, is he cuts from... So you know how they get out of the mountain, and they have that big scene where Bilbo gives that great speech about how, I'm staying with you guys, and then they are chased by the orcs again. And what happens then in the first movie is the scene with the tree and the eagles and everything. What he does is they're running down the mountain, and he just match cuts it to film 2 where they're running to Bjorn's house and cuts like 30 minutes of content out. It's actually pretty clean. It just looks like they run from the orcs to Bjorn, and
it's the magic of editing, man.
Magic of editing.
People listening have never tried to edit any sort of video content, be really surprised by the things you can manage to cut and still have it make perfect fucking sense when you actually watch it with no like prior knowledge.
Yeah, no, editing's amazing, and I guess he also he has a whole log where you can read what he did, and he said he cut everything relating to Dol Guldur, cut Radagast completely, all of those things, and he says it was the easiest part because there's no way you can miss it.
Exactly. Because there's nothing. It's so segregated out.
Yeah.
Which is why it doesn't work in the first place. Is that it's like you can just cut it and no one would ever know. There's like no trace of it.
Yeah, he says he cut Tariel completely, which made the barrels sequence hard to edit, but he apparently did it. I think it's interesting. He really hated Tariel. So
I don't hate Tariel. Yeah. I just hate what they did with her.
I understand. Yeah, so I just think it's an interesting sounding project. Maybe I might give that a watch at some point. It does sound interesting. Yeah, but. And I think there's awkward things that we're never going to be able to fully fix. Like, you can't excise the dwarves fight with Smaug. Mm-hmm. And he cut out the molten gold bit, but there's still the problem of Smaug leaves Erebor with gold all over him.
Yeah.
And if you have the money, you could fix that maybe, but it'd be tough.
It's just shot with like a cartoon, crayon dragon.
Yeah. So I think you're going to have to use your imagination for this one and all other fan edits that come out. But... it might be this series' salvation at a certain point.
Yeah, so that we can get some, it's never going to be perfect, because again, like I said, like, the problems with these movies are not just like that there's a lot of dumb subplots and shit.
Yeah.
It's like there's a lot of other things that are wrong, but there's a lot of stuff you can't improve by cutting out, like, the dumb bullshit.
But, like, I was just watching the beginning of this, and it immediately felt much more like The Hobbit to me, because it starts with Bilbo as we know him in these films, mm-hmm. And Thorin's there by minute 10, not minute 45, and it's just, that feels like The Hobbit to me.
Yeah.
And I like that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting. And I do look forward to, in 20 years, when Peter Jackson gives a tell-all interview and says what was up with this series.
Yeah, there's definitely some stuff that had to have gone on that made this a pain in the ass to deal with, I'm sure, from a production side.
Yeah. And if you look at just how rushed they were on production on all of these, and they got each one of them barely out the door, stuff was happening, and it's weird. So that's The Hobbit. Sad that we have to end it that way, but there you go.
No, man, they're going to make... I heard they're going to... My friend told me, my friend's friends told me they're going to make a Silmarillion movie.
Oh, can I just put the final word on that really quick?
Yeah.
The Tolkien estate owns the Silmarillion. They hate Peter Jackson with a fiery passion. There will not be a Silmarillion movie, guys.
No, man. No, my friend's uncle, he works... He is the Tolkien estate, and he totally said they're making a Silmarillion. I don't know what the Silmarillion is. I never read it. They're totally making it, though, bro.
Doctor Who. Doctor Who.
Yeah.
All right, Doctor Who Christmas special.
That's all the Silmarillion I need.
Annual tradition, Doctor Who airs a special episode on Christmas. This one...
The last Christmas.
A little more urgent, maybe, than other ones, because the series finished relatively recently and ended in such a way where we were kind of left wanting in both qualitative and narrative senses.
Yes.
So...
And there was an open question in the air of, like, okay, is Clara leaving or not?
Right, so... Doctor Who, Last Christmas. If you want to hear our thoughts on Series 8, Peter Capaldi's first season, we talked about every episode on the show. You can go look at that. We loved it. Peter Capaldi's great.
Yeah,
Jenna Coleman's great. Great season for the show.
Definitely.
Definitely riding even if the finale was terrible, we were riding kind of a high into this Christmas special. So, Sean, Last Christmas, what did you think of this Doctor Who Christmas special?
I liked it. Like, it's not an amazing episode by any means. It definitely has some things that are awkward about it. But I think overall, it's a really good Doctor Who episode. Like, it was something that was like, I watched it, I was having a lot of fun while I watched it, and when I was done, I was really satisfied. I was like, yeah, that's an episode of Doctor Who. Like, it's not going to blow your mind, but most of the Christmas specials don't,
Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary of it. I think the word awkward is a good one to use, because I definitely felt there were awkward parts to this.
Yeah.
However, I will say, as you say, I enjoyed it while watching it, and it's definitely grown on me in my mind since seeing it.
Yeah.
Because I think the things it does well are really pretty smart and mature and touching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially, I think one of the, just like, from the, like, in terms of it being sort of the continuation of the events of the season, like, I think one of the things that I really like, because I'm always kind of a fan of this plot device in a series, is, like, the time jump kind of thing, where it's like, you just, like, take a break from the characters in their life for, like, years, and then you come back and visit them to sort of, like, deal with the aftermath of something traumatic. I think that's usually a lot better of a way to handle it than try to, like, just follow right on the foot of it. So I feel like I really like revisiting Clara, and it's been several years for her since the end of the last season, and so sort of like dealing with the death of Danny Pink and stuff like that it's a much more interesting way to deal with the fallout of that sort of like grief by revisiting it in this way, you know, than just like having to be like, oh, the next day the doctor just drops by again, and then he finds out it's like it's been years for her.
And we don't know how long it's been for the Doctor, but I do get the sense that he had some good audiobook adventures.
Yeah. He had a couple of adventures, but I don't think it's not been nearly as long for him as it was for Clara. Yeah, although it's always hard to tell. But yeah, I mean, there's that phenomenal joke of he cannot tell how old she is. They do that because it's so unexpected that they're going to pull that out again, like at the very end.
God. Yeah, so anyway, that was, I mean, the character side of this was great, and that continues the Series 8 thing for me, which is that no matter what, they always did character stuff well. The plot kind of came and went, and I think that's true of this episode, too. I like a lot of the story mechanics here. I like the face huggers, kind of. I think it's an interesting idea for a monster. I think it goes a little too full-on Inception at a certain point, and I think the problem is Inception was a movie that could breathe over 2 hours and kind of let you linger in this dream world, whereas this is the main way they told us there was a dream going on is the characters faced the camera and said, we're dreaming.
It definitely, especially when you get into like the multiple dream state things, at some point it's like has to push that so hard, you know, to try to like get the idea all the way through.
It's the problem of, and maybe you felt this, I figured out the plot 20 minutes before the Doctor did, and the Doctor should be a step ahead of you. That's always a little awkward when you're feeling smarter than the Doctor. Especially when it's Peter Capaldi who has just that wit about him. It feels a little unbelievable. But, that being said, I thought the dream stuff made for some good tense scenes. And more than anything, character-wise, they really pulled it out in those last 20 minutes. I mean, I think, good God, the Santa thing could have gone south so easily. But I thought it was kind of brilliant, the way they use Santa here, which is they really dived into that thing of people always say around Christmas time that, which is an easy thing to say, that Santa is kind of this, you know, message and this symbol more than he is obviously a real thing. But I thought they said it in a way here where I believed that again, you know, and I thought that connection between Santa and the Doctor, again, could have been cheesy, worked pretty well here. With the character of Clara, and you know how he kept showing up in those moments where they were tense and needed someone, and Nick Frost was just so good and so warm, such a great Santa Claus. And then leading into those final 10 minutes or so, when ultimately, I think what's interesting about this story is for the most of the runtime, you think it's a story about Clara, like most of Series 8 was, and it turns out to be a story about the Doctor afraid of having fucked this relationship up. And I thought they built to that so well, because sometimes when the Doctor is too maybe worried about a personal relationship, you don't fully believe it. Like maybe he wouldn't care that much about that person because he is an immortal Time Lord. But here, I really believe that anxiety of he sees her as an old woman and he just is kind of broken inside because he realizes he threw this great relationship away. I think that turn near the end is one of the better things Stephen Moffat has written in a while, honestly.
It's definitely, because it's something where, and I imagine this must be I feel like what must have happened is they were like making, like he was writing the episode and like he didn't know if like he needed to get rid of Clara or not. So I feel like probably the original ending of the episode is just she's old and that's it. Like they can't.
And there were rumors that was the case.
Yeah, that was going to be the end of her story, which would have been a really good end to her story. But I think it still feels, and it's like the most Christmas thing about the episode is that, like, you get the second chance, you know? That there's that hope. Because it is such a, like, even if, like, how it necessarily works in the context of, like, the multiple dream states is really fuzzy, that, like, probably the logic of the episode, that, like, extra little kick doesn't really work, but you don't care that much. But it's, like, it is a really good mechanic where it's, like, he revisits he thinks he's in the real world, and then, like, oh god, the whole time Clara has been that old. Like, it's a really big impact, you know, because it's for him and I think for the audience of like, oh shit, like that's a really big moment.
Yeah, it's like but the whole episode, and where it's subtle, it works so well, is about these fears we have that actualize through dream states. And that last scene is great, and I like when you see that when he wakes up, he's on some fire planet, he's in some bad place. It's like the Doctor's equivalent of being drunk in an alleyway, you know? And I like seeing that we don't know what's going on in his life at that moment, but I think there's a suggestion that whatever happened going into this episode, he was at a low point. He was at a rough point. He was feeling very bad.
Yeah,
And-
he's lonely,
Yeah.
because he gets like that a lot.
Yeah, and this pulled him back. And, obviously if they had not earned this relationship over the last 12 episodes, this episode wouldn't work. But they did, and I think this special is a real testament to what Series 8 did well.
Yeah, definitely.
And I even really loved that last shot where it pans down to the tangerine, because that felt like, I don't know, it's what I love about that is that, okay, it could just be she had a tangerine there.
Yeah.
And that's probably what it is. I don't think the message is Santa is real, but I like that little suggestion of how
But isn't he?
But that's the message,
Yeah.
is the forces of these things are real in our lives.
Yeah, exactly. The sort of like the power of the imagination of the idea of Santa in his like very like dream-like existence is significant. Yeah.
And in some ways, I think, even though this was not a Christmassy episode in some ways, it had that very alien vibe to it.
Yeah.
I thought it had more to say about Christmas as a holiday than any other Doctor Who Christmas special. Maybe you could say the Christmas Carol, but a Christmas Carol, to me, is a story that happens at Christmas. It's not about Christmas. And that's true of Charles Dickens and Doctor Who. So, very interesting that it does all those things.
Yeah. There's something about like the episode with like the whole them being facehuggers, like to the point where they address it in the episode, which also gives like the Doctor that really great.
Oh, I wanted
line.
to talk about this. This is one of my favorite Doctor Who jokes ever, where it's, you have a horror movie called Alien? That's incredibly insulting.
Yeah.
Or offensive,
Yeah, it's incredibly offensive.
And what's great is that, again, Peter Capaldi doesn't say that it's a joke. He's legitimately offended.
It's a really good line. But there's something about that it's like, I was waiting the whole time for it was to be like, the real last kick would have been like, that was all a fucking dream, man! Because of course there aren't fucking facehugger aliens that give you dream states. Like, that's something that would be in like a cheap horror episode of Doctor Who. Oh, okay.
I mean, I was actually
It
thinking
didn't need that last kick, but I thought that's what was going to happen.
Well, but I was thinking about this, and I would have been okay with this, and I wanted to ask you, if the episode had ended and it turned out all of it was just in the Doctor's head, and it was him playing out this anxiety, and he just went back to Clara, and the last scene was she didn't have this dream, it was just him, would that have worked?
Depending on how you played it, I think Peter Capaldi could have pulled it off. Like
Yeah.
it would be a really hard thing to do and not feel really cheap.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see what you're saying with that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you could say that he just invented all of this and we're playing it out in his mind to see this story, but I think the emotional reality would still be palpable enough that you wouldn't be mad about there not being a reality to it.
Yeah.
Then again, I think there is a strength that the supporting cast in this episode is pretty good by Doctor Who standards.
Yeah, I like them.
And it's nice to see them all wake up in the real world. And
and they serve a really interesting mechanic in terms of like trying to determine like the nature of the reality in the situation. Like I feel like when they tried to read the books and stuff like that, like there's something about their characters where because from like the beginning of the episode, there's something very off about them because it's like particularly like that one like kind of ditzy girl. It's like she so does not belong in this scenario. That's just basically the like John Carpenter's The Thing with like aliens instead of the Thing. And it's like there's something so weird about it that when it kind of comes together where it's like, oh, okay, they're all in a dream. It sort of starts introducing that concept of like these people have nothing to do with each other, and like who they are in the real world can be that really nice reveal that then gives the impact for the Clara one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very well thought out premise. I think that it's like because it goes through so much stuff and to deliver so many sort of like different emotional impacts that like a normal plot would not have been able to do. It's a very Doctor Who episode that I appreciate.
And I thought in terms of how Stephen Moffat's recent hour-long episodes have gone, this was easily the best paced. This felt like it needed the hour to tell its story. It didn't feel necessarily too overstuffed. It really felt like it felt mostly comfortable in that hour. As I say, some of the dream mechanics a little messy, but overall worked.
Yeah, but not in a way that's unusual for Doctor Who. Like it was just a little bit of like the concept's really heavy, so it's like you need a bit of like a heavy-handed exposition to get it through for the episode.
Yeah, it didn't feel like Deep Breath, which had too little content for too much time, or Death in Heaven, which had too much content
like
for too little
Wedding
time.
of River Song is my go-to for that with Stephen Moffat.
Or even Time with the Doctor, last year's Christmas special, which I liked and you liked, but is awkward in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, it had to be awkward based on where they were ending with that incarnation of the Doctor and all the shit they had hanging.
But man, let's just reflect on this. 1 year later from that episode, we are so much more positive on Doctor Who right now.
Think of how much the show has changed now since then.
And successfully.
Yeah. And then I was also talking to you about after I watched this episode and I was like, okay, Clara's staying on. That's cool. And I was like thinking about like, but wait a second. Like when this next season with Clara is up, she will have been around for as long as Amy and Rory. Which, like, that seems so fucking crazy to me.
Because at this point in Amy and Rory's run, like midway through season 6, episode-wise, I think we were ready to see them go.
Yeah, we were winding down. It's like, okay, yeah, like, these characters are basically have seen, like, their run on Doctor Who, and then you get, what is it, God Complex? That's the episode where it's like, they go home.
And you feel like that's the right...
Yeah, and you're like, okay, great, we're done with these characters. And then they bring them back, and you're like, oh, no! And you have that half season... And then it's like Clara, so far, is like the exact opposite, where it's like you have her, like actual Clara introduced in the middle of the season with Bells of St. John, and you're like, oh god, what are they doing with this character? They're turning her into this like weird plot point. They're doing all this stuff where everyone's saying Doctor Who all the time, and it's like they had more interesting versions of this character that they killed off, and now we have the dullest of the lot to stick with. And it was like, oh fuck, and then you get fucking season 8 and you're like, holy shit, they turned her completely around. She is like the main focus of season 8, like not to the detriment of the Doctor storyline, but she's sort of like, you know, the clincher for like a lot of the overarching story stuff. And it's like it worked great. Like she's an incredible companion, maybe my favorite companion in all of New Who. And it's like, and she's coming back and I'm super happy about it. And like hopefully, you know, when that season starts we don't start getting tired of her, but
well, I don't think we will, because that's something that Last Christmas really underlined for me, which is that she's in a different place in her life now. Mm-hmm. I don't think it would be right to leave her with the death of Danny Pink, largely because of the way they handled it.
Yeah.
But even then, I think it would be the nice tragic ending, I guess, but also that's such a complete character shift.
Yeah.
You have this need to, like, well, what's next? Because...
Yeah, and she's such a strong character, and I don't mean strong in terms of, like well written, I mean, like, more like her personality, like, she's such a strong person that, like, yeah, the death of Danny Pink I don't think is, like, such a hard, like, it's a harsh blow, but it's not, like, such a traumatic thing that she has to leave, you know? That it's, like, she can still stick on the show. It's not something where it's, like, there have been several companions in the past, like, Tegan is a really good example in the Fifth Doctor's era, where, like, a lot of shit happens, like, you know, like, Adric dies, and a lot of shit happens in the Fifth Doctor's era, where it's like, Tegan has to leave, because there's no way that character could handle the stress of the situations she's being put in anymore. Where it's like, Clara, that's not the case. Where it's like, I think she can absolutely stick through and, like, keep on developing.
No, and the dynamic they hint at between her and the Doctor here is different than it was last season. It's evolved. They're in a new place in their lives, both of them. They're different than the people we met in Deep Breath, and I want to see more of that. I legitimately do. I think it would be, honestly, a mistake to leave Clara behind at this point, because there's narrative territory you haven't gone to yet.
Yeah.
And just, you know, as much as we praise Peter Capaldi, you have to recognize that so much of what he's doing is being brought out by Jenna Coleman and vice versa. And, you know, I don't think you would want to squander that at this point.
Yeah, yeah, she's such a good companion.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's, like, because she also, which is, like something that, like, Amy and Rory were really good, but I feel like there were some episodes where they were a bit distracting, you know?
Yeah.
And there's something where it's like with Clara, and I think particularly season 8 proved this, that she, when an episode does not have to, when an episode's just a normal Doctor Who episode, she just works really well. I think that part of that is just like Jenna Coleman is a really, really great actress, and she just like gets the part so well. I think there's also something about the nature of Clara as a character that she can serve that role almost like kind of like Sarah Jane Smith used to, in a way that it's just like she can just be in those situations and just be a part of those stories without always having the story be about her. Like, she's so strong and so capable that it feels very natural that she's with the Doctor. Whereas, like, sometimes with Amy and Rory, it's like you felt like if the story wasn't about them, they felt a little bit distracting in certain places.
No, they did, yeah, definitely. And it's the best of both worlds scenario, because you could always go back in the next episode and do something Clara-centric.
Yeah.
And that dynamic can work. Mm-hmm. So they've done a hell of a job turning that character around.
Yeah. Like, man, can you imagine if we would have thought, it's like, this Clara character, she's not working out so well now, but man, she's definitely going to be a great companion in the next season. Like, I never would have thought that they would have been able to do this with her.
I mean, I always thought the raw elements were there in Jenna Coleman, because it was clear to me she was a great actress, But, now that we've seen all this, it's not just she's a great actress, she's easily the best performer they've had on this show in that secondary slot in the new Who.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I think she's probably a better actor than, some of the doctors, like Chris Eccleston. I mean, she's just at a level of performing really talent that when they give her good stuff to do, she's, I mean, I don't think it's an easy thing to act opposite a legend like Peter Capaldi week in and week out and absolutely hold your own and be an equal. But she's doing it. And I think that's also the thing. I think it would be, I wish we would have had more companions in the Matt Smith run, because I think he was the kind of guy, as we saw with their various guest stars, he played well off a lot of different types of people.
Yeah.
I think you're going to need to be careful with Peter Capaldi, because he is that strong an actor, that good an actor, that uncompromising. It's finding the right chemistry will be tough, and I don't think you want to throw it out the window too fast when you find it.
Yeah, and it's not only like his presence, but it's also like his version of the Doctor is so domineering and kind of arrogant in so many ways that I think it's tricky to find a character that works with him. Yeah. It's definitely honestly, I'm curious to see what when Jenna Coleman does leave, what they're going to have to do to sort of do a new companion.
I think that's when they're going to have to really reinvent things.
Yeah,
companion-wise. But I mean, that's why Deep Breath doesn't work. Is the gang people, the lizard woman and her lesbian lover, as we learned many times. Man. Yeah, Potato Man. They don't work opposite Peter Capaldi. They're just not funny.
At all. They are from a different era of the show.
Yeah, they worked fine with Matt Smith. Great, even in bad episodes. But no, they don't work with Peter Capaldi. So, and they haven't come back yet. And
thank God.
Yeah, and I think that's probably conscious, because there was probably an impulse at some point to say, well, they'll come back in the next Christmas special, because that's when we want to see them.
Yeah.
And I think they probably realized what they had on their hands and why this couldn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's pretty cool that Stephen Moffat is going into his 5th year, and I don't feel like he's run out of gas. I think he's gotten a second wind here.
Yeah, he still has his issues as a showrunner.
Yes.
But it's not like a disaster.
No.
Yeah.
I did hear something interesting the other day.
It's the opposite of a disaster, in my opinion.
Yeah. I heard something interesting the other day. We are 2015. This is the 10th anniversary of the Revived series.
Yeah.
And I guess they tried really hard to get Russell T Davies back this year to write an episode, and he wouldn't do it. That's interesting. That would be cool if they could get him back to do one.
I would like to see what he would do.
On a one-off. Because, there are a few people more important to the history of Doctor Who. We would not be sitting here talking about it without that guy. Mm-hmm. Bringing the show back in as good a form as he did, whatever problems there were with his run. I'd be interested in that.
It'd be really funny if you wrote an episode and it's he just brings Rose back with the Meta-Crisis Doctor and it's all this shit and you're like, no, what did you do? You don't need to do this, RTD. You're a really good writer in your own right. You don't need to bring all this bullshit back.
Right. Man, now I'm imagining, though, David Tennant and Peter Capaldi playing opposite each other. I can't wait for the next special.
But I'm I actually, all of a sudden, I really want that to happen because I'm imagining fucking the 12th Doctor explaining Rose to Clara. Can you imagine that? Him sitting there, I was in a dark fucking place. There was a weird part in my life. And I fell in love with this 19-year-old blonde clerk from London. I'm not proud of it either.
That would be funny because it would be Clara taking the piss out of him.
Yeah, exactly.
For the whole thing.
For something super stupid. She would just tear him apart when she found out about Rose.
That would make the whole Rose thing totally worth it.
Yeah, it would be that would be an amazing scene. Holy shit. That scene just writes itself.
When I think about it now, I almost feel like the Rose stuff helped turn the 12th Doctor into the man he is.
Yeah. God, can you imagine, there's, that's gotta be one of those things for the Doctor, especially in this incarnation, when you're, kind of, sitting there and nothing's going on, and then all of a sudden you think about something you did in, 5th grade that was, the stupidest, most embarrassing thing, and you're and you just kind of, freak out, and you're I'm so embarrassed right now. That's him. He's just sitting in his chair and is I kissed Rose. Oh! Fuck!
There's an alternate version of me out there right now probably doing her now in a parallel universe.
Yeah, right, yeah.
That's why he's so mad. That's what he's trying to forget in Last Christmas when he's lying on the lava planet.
Yeah. Man. Fucking Rose.
Oh. Yep. Well, in any case, I think we're off to a good start with 2015. Good Doctor Who discussion. Yeah. Good Hobbit discussion. Good video games discussion. Longest show we have ever done, I think. I'll have to look at that.
Well, we took a bit of a hiatus. So.
We did. But we'll be back soon. I won't promise next week, but there's stuff to talk about.
We can never promise. a weekly thing ever again. We've not earned that promise.
Send in naming suggestions to
Yeah.
the contact form on jonathanlack.com. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Good job. Yeah.
Twitter at
Can't
jonathanlack.
even
Just do
remember your
that.
own goddamn contact information.
My email. I need a better email address for the site.
Yeah.
In any case, this is the Weekly Stuff Podcast. This is 2015.
2015.
Yeah.
It's a brave new year. Bold new world.